Chapter 8. Going Global. I knew that if Dyson was to be a successful technology company, rather than just a British vacuum cleaner manufacturer, we couldn't be little Englanders. We needed to become global, and quickly. England, and the rest of the United Kingdom, is simply not a big enough market on its own to sustain the constant and huge investment technology requires. This is in stark contrast to the United States, where the internal market is so huge, or Asia, where there is such rapid and exciting growth. An average-sized American company is 6 times bigger than any large British company, and can invest accordingly. This is what we were up against, and I knew it. The difficult thing in the early days, however, was that we honestly didn't have time to go to Australia, the US, or even France to try to set up companies. We were entirely consumed by the challenge of manufacturing enough vacuum cleaners for the UK, while simultaneously researching and developing new products and coping with all the issues that emerged from being a fast-growing manufacturing company. Production issues dominated the early days. Suppliers, for example, let us down with components, so we needed to find alternative and reliable, good-quality suppliers, especially as our volumes escalated. The dual sourcing of suppliers became important, in case of stoppages, and to maintain a competitive edge between suppliers. Meanwhile, finding production space for assembly lines and for training people on new products was becoming difficult. Recruiting young engineers to work in Malmesbury rather than in London was also tricky. We needed more of them as we expanded and began new design projects. Recruitment at a time when the business was doubling in size every year was time-consuming too. At this high rate of expansion, predicting sales volumes is critical. We usually underestimated what we needed, although this is a better problem to have than being overstocked. And yet, with a young and enthusiastic team, we learned to overcome these types of difficulties. For our expansion overseas, I needed to find really good people who understood what I was doing and who were going to be able to excite other people about the technology. The problem I discovered is that it is nearly impossible to persuade really good people to leave an established company to join a startup that absolutely nobody has heard of. It just doesn't happen like that. We may have been quite well known in England, but we were totally unknown everywhere else in the world. There was no reason for any retailer to take on Dyson, or for any household to aspire to buy our vacuum cleaner. Without proper explanation, ours was an odd-looking and expensive product. Other countries had their own established brands, and that was our problem. Australia was the exception for 2 reasons. Firstly, I landed on my feet and found a good person to run the business. This was Ross Cameron, the talented and energetic Australian in charge of commercial machinery at Johnson Wax, with whom we had a license agreement. In 1995, he rang me late one night, completely out of the blue, and said, "I'm leaving Johnson Wax because I'm fed up with globetrotting." I said, "Why don't you set up Dyson Australia? We won't be able to offer any help because we're all too busy, but let's do it." Ross said yes, and did it. Ross didn't take a salary in the first year, yet he committed himself entirely to setting up Dyson in Australia. Although he was an engineer, trained as an apprentice at the Austin Morris factory in Sydney, he was a brilliant natural marketeer and salesman too. It's a slightly odd thing to be selling an upright cleaner in Australia in what is a cylinder, or barrel as they call it, market, but Ross made a remarkable success of it. The second reason I believe for our earlier success in Australia was the attitude of the retailers there. There were 2 big retailers, one called Harvey Norman, a huge operation run by a wonderful and enterprising couple. It took a while to convince Katie Page of our credentials, but once we did, she totally understood what we were about. Her enthusiasm for the product and the technology helped it to take off to the extent that we captured 60% of the market. The Pages are very good friends and very good retailers, with shops spread across the globe. Now I had Ross Cameron doing Australia on the other side of the world, with retailers on board, but without much help from us. The time had come to employ a dedicated marketing person back in the UK. I put a notice up at the University of Bath. It read, "Does any modern languages graduate want to do some marketing at Dyson?" Oddly, an Oxford graduate turned up at the office. The daughter of a school teacher, Rebecca Briggs knew nothing about business and even less about marketing, but she was bright and sparky. I took her on immediately, and she joined our growing team of young graduates. Her husband Alan was to become our first in-house lawyer. Rebecca's German language skills proved to be a very handy asset indeed, since we'd been getting sales inquiries from British Army on the Rhine. I sent Rebecca off to Germany with one of our English salesmen. Then once I'd decided she had enough direct experience of selling, Rebecca came back to the office and got sucked deep into marketing, having never done anything of the kind before. She had a wonderful instinct for it, and the nous and confidence to believe in her intuition. Because of our exciting and different technology, we didn't have to market our product in a traditional sense. I didn't want anyone to buy our vacuum cleaner through slick advertising. I wanted them to buy it because it performed. We could be straightforward in what we said, explaining things simply and clearly. Rebecca ran our marketing very successfully for many years. She would go out, make store visits, and do a bit of selling herself in the stores, which is very important, but for some reason it's very difficult to get conventional marketing people to do this. My only disappointment is that whenever she took somebody on, it was someone with 5 or 6 years' experience. She wouldn't take on fresh graduates. We corrected that many years ago. I do understand how she felt, as apparently it is safer and more responsible to employ someone with experience, while if you're very busy, it seems a bad idea to spend time training people. In 1996, 3 years after the UK launch, I decided it was time to set up properly in France with our own company. Germany, Benelux and Spain followed in 1998 and Italy in 2000. None of these ventures were runaway business success stories. Getting the right team in place was a challenge. The first person we had running Dyson in France, for example, established the office in Créteil, in the suburbs of Paris, a soul-destroying place to visit, let alone work. I expressed my dissatisfaction to the team. We have to be more aspirational and optimistic than this. I spoke to Andy Garnett, who had been with me at Rotalk, and had also left to start a successful company of his own. I had noticed that Andy was brilliant at finding the best offices, and he knew Paris very well. I asked him if he could find us an office in Paris. Together, we moved Dyson to Rue La Boétie, a street leading off the Champs-Élysées and entering Rue Saint-Honoré. It's not a shopping district, rather a place where smart people have offices. I asked Chris Wilkinson to design us an office with, at street level, a sculpture gallery. We knocked through between the ground floor and the first floor and had a glass frontage to the showroom stretching up from pavement level to the top of the first floor. We installed 2 mezzanines connected by a stainless steel and glass bridge. The ground floor had nothing except a French limestone floor, white walls, and plinths supporting a cylinder vacuum cleaner and an upright vacuum cleaner. Nothing was said about the products. There were no price tags. All we had on display were products on plinths. It resembled a minimalist sculpture gallery. We had a limestone desk behind which sat a sales assistant. And rather like an art gallery, we had just a few select customers. We wanted to display our product how we thought it ought to be displayed. This is not a criticism of electric retailers, who know their business very well indeed, and who have to display many companies' products and do so to maximize their sales. The result, though, can be a plethora of signs and discount tickets, offers and credit terms, with each manufacturer jostling for a good position. It was a relief in our Paris gallery to be able to have a sense of calmness, with no signs, and with just one of each product on a pedestal. Admittedly, this was a very expensive experiment, which could not be repeated elsewhere at that stage, although we longed to do so. The Dyson demo stores we have since opened around the world, including the large flagship store in the Opera district of Paris, are descended from that first gallery shop in Rue La Boétie. They are canvases on which to display and demonstrate our technology in exactly the way we want to. The first Apple store, some years later in Soho, New York, was exactly the same format, with a French limestone floor, mezzanines, stainless steel and glass bridges, and products on white plinths with no writing. I was keen to start our own company in Japan, although we couldn't do this until we were able to buy back the license agreement from Apex, which we did in 1997. At that point, I flew on a jumbo jet to Tokyo on a trade mission with Tony Blair just after he became Prime Minister. I was looking for someone to run Dyson Japan. I used a recruitment agency, specifying that I wanted a young and inexperienced person to run the show. But the people they introduced me to were certainly not young. I tried another agency with the same result. In those days, Japanese business was very, very traditional, and the older you were, the wiser you were considered to be, and the more people listened to you. The agencies thought, on my behalf, that this was the type of person who should run Dyson. In the end, I said, the last thing I want is someone who knows what they're doing. I want a young Japanese person to run this business, because we're doing something different. I knew these bright young Japanese people existed, because I'd met some of them, but they couldn't find any of them to work for me. In the end, I thought that a Scottish trade counsellor from the British Embassy in Tokyo might be an unusual, intriguing enough bet to run the company and to win an audience with the big Japanese retailers. I took a chance and hired him. My hypothesis was correct. Dyson was finally established in Japan. Japan has its own brilliant history of innovation. I loved my Honda 50, or Super Cub as it was properly known, and was inspired by the ingenious Sony Walkman. When in 2017 we sold our 100 millionth Dyson product, Honda announced sales of the Super Cub surpassing that figure, and in doing so, it had become the most produced motor vehicle ever. In 2004, we took the DC-12 cylinder vacuum cleaner to Japan, calling it the Dyson City. It was engineered specifically for the tiny, perfectly formed homes of Japan. We were amazed by its success. Within 3 months, it had captured 20% of the Japanese market and went on to become the country's best-selling vacuum cleaner. As I had discovered for myself years before with the G-Force, the Japanese are truly fascinated by exquisitely crafted objects and new technology products. DC-12 was the bonsai of vacuum cleaners, small enough to fit on a sheet of A4 paper and weighing just 1.5 kilos. Powered by the new Dyson digital motor and with a power-to-weight ratio 5 times greater than a contemporary Ferrari Formula One racing car, its performance was well out of proportion to its size. Given the size of so many Japanese homes, the DC-12 all but specified itself, filling a niche in a market dominated by well-known Japanese electronics and household goods manufacturers like Sanyo, Sharp, Toshiba, Panasonic and Mitsubishi. We decided on a grand launch in the piazza of Roppongi Hills, the vast urban complex constructed by Minoru Mori, the building tycoon, which had only just opened. I had tea with Mr. Mori and Sir Terence Conrad and received permission to build 3 pavilions for the occasion, a cube, a sphere and a triangle, made of DC-12s. Peter Gamak and I, with Derek Phillips, who can make anything, also designed and built the world's first see-through velodrome for the occasion, with clear polycarbonate walls held together by tension wires. Everyone, at any level, could see the cyclists as they spun round a clear wall of death, demonstrating the various centrifugal forces by which dust is separated in the cyclone of our machines. Issey Miyake, whose fashion show in Paris I would design a few years later, came along, as did the champion Japanese sumo wrestler, both fans of Dyson products. I don't know how many good launches we do, but this one set us off on the right foot. We certainly got noticed. Retailers were quick to take on the DC-12 and to make a success of it. Technology-savvy Japan has proved to be a fantastic market for Dyson, and it's very important to me personally, since it was the first to believe in my technology. As I have said, the Japanese company Apex licensed the pink G-Force back in 1985 and had sold it ever since, whereas other licensees fell by the wayside. Visits to Japan are some of my most keenly anticipated. By 2002, we were ready for our next big adventure, the US. At the time, the market in the US was dominated by big retailers like Walmart, Target, Best Buy, Sears Roebuck, Costco, and Kohl's. They were national, not regional, retailers. instead of starting gradually in a region, we had to cover the entire 50 states from the outset. Retailers have to be certain they can sell your product before taking it on, but we were an unknown company with a different looking and expensive vacuum cleaner and no track record. We pointed out that we'd been successful in the UK, but this cut no ice. To say the US is different is an understatement. No retailer would take us on, until, that is, a junior buyer at Best Buy took a Dyson home. This was the DC-07 with multiple upside-down cyclones. The brave buyer went back to her bosses and said the Dyson was everything we said it was. The bosses relented and agreed to put us in 50 stores. The trial was a success, and we were rolled out to most of their stores on the condition that we did national advertising on TV. This was no mean undertaking. The US creatives we spoke to said, "We think James should front the ad in person." I was taken aback, recalling Victor Khayyam of Remington fronting his ads with, "I like the shaver so much, I bought the company." What they had in mind, thankfully, was something much gentler. The ad was directed by a wonderful British director, Nicholas Barker. The ad was shot in one room at home in Wiltshire. I didn't say how brilliant my product was. I simply explained the technology. Deirdre and the children were horrified when I told them I'd be fronting the advertisements. I found out why when Saturday Night Live parodied me with a fair-haired Englishman sitting on a lavatory, following my script, and explaining how he had to build a few thousand prototypes to get his lavatory invention to work. The thing, though, that really struck home with American consumers was that I said I'd made 5,127 prototypes of the vacuum cleaner. Americans like entrepreneurs, and they particularly liked the fact that I'd made and developed the vacuum cleaner myself. I wasn't a salesman entrepreneur, I was an inventor entrepreneur. We took off very quickly in America. Immigration officials in the US always say, "You're the 5,000 prototype guy." So it must have worked. There was even a Friends episode featuring Monica's obsession with the Dyson vacuum. Following our first success, Nicholas Barker shot many advertisements with me. I'm not sure that the personal appearances worked so well in the UK, although we did try. They certainly didn't work in Europe, where I think they wanted a product from a large and well-established company, fronted by an executive in a laboratory dressed in a white coat. We did, though, try it quite successfully in Japan. The general idea was to show that Dyson was founded by Mr. Dyson, and that he was responsible for Dyson products. Big and long-established multinationals, most of them public companies, would not be able to put forward an individual in the same way. I believe that trustworthiness and loyalty come from striving to develop and make high-performing products and then looking after customers who have bought them. I am not a believer in the theory that great marketing campaigns can replace great products. What you say should be true to who you are. Selling in a market as large as the US, however, required a significant increase in manufacturing capacity. In 2000, we made 800,000 vacuum cleaners and washing machines, but in doing so, we had completely run out of assembly space to expand into and manufacturing staff at Malmesbury, where unemployment was very low and sometimes even zero. Desperately short of local labour, we had to bus people in from far afield. Even more importantly, all our suppliers of plastics, components and electronics were in Southeast Asia, while along with Australia and Japan, our fastest growing markets were there too. Our overheads, meanwhile, had ballooned, so both logistically and practically we had to move production. When in 2002 I first announced the move of our vacuum cleaner production from England to Southeast Asia, I found myself in a quandary. While campaigning for more support for British manufacturing companies, we had been refused planning permission to expand our factory, but we needed to expand quickly. The solution was apparent. There were empty factories in Malaysia, as electronics companies abandoned the country for cheaper production in China. Local workforces in both Malaysia and Singapore were highly skilled, enterprising and hard-working. We effectively had no choice, while the advantages were too great to ignore. The decision was a sad one for the 500 employees who lost their jobs with us, but it was the right one for the long-term future of the company. Dyson was trapped, with neither room to expand nor a sufficiently large supply of labour. Our suppliers were thousands of miles away. Ever since, Dyson has been able to expand both in the UK and around the world on a scale that would have been impossible if we hadn't made the leap to Southeast Asia. We now employ 4,000 people in the UK, far more than before the move, mostly engineers on 2 campuses in Malmesbury and Levington. No one could have tried harder than I did to make things work in Britain. One logical move had been to try to buy land around us and to put up new buildings. But when we floated a design by Chris Wilkinson for a new factory sunk into the ground and invisible from the surrounding countryside, it was attacked by local interests, including the local Conservative MP. For us, it proved to be a case of checkmate. If Britain wants to retain manufacturing, it must begin reforming planning laws. A manufacturer will only commit capital to build an expensive new factory when he can see future sales, but then he needs it fast. He cannot wait the 4 years or more that our system takes to find out whether he has permission to build, and wait a further 2 years for construction. He will go instead to a country where this happens in 4 months, as indeed it does with our factories in Asia. I couldn't help thinking that although we're creating wealth in modern factories and laboratories, and even though Chris's design proposals were highly refined, factories and manufacturers in Britain were still looked down upon as being somehow rough and grubby. The reaction to our proposal was certainly a very British case of not in my backyard. The attitude towards manufacturing, trade and industry could hardly be more different in Singapore, a city-state with 3 big sovereign funds investing in science and technology, and a culture in which this is celebrated. Singapore is an exciting place, a hub and a heart of world trade. Each year, some 100,000 ships sail through the Strait of Malacca, the narrow 500-mile stretch of water between the Malay Peninsula and Sumatra, connecting the Indian and Pacific Oceans. This commercial armada carries a quarter of the world's goods, a fraction that will continue to increase as the energetic economies of Asia grow. Independent since 1965, Singapore rose rapidly, initially under the premiership of Lee Kuan Yew, a dynamic Cambridge-trained lawyer, to become a highly successful multiracial meritocracy, the very model in many ways of free trade economy at work. If we had gone ahead with the electric car, it would have been built in a brand new factory of our own in Singapore. Dyson's presence in Asia has built up significantly since we started in Singapore, to the extent that we now have our global headquarters there, along with campuses and research laboratories in Singapore, Malaysia and the Philippines. Singapore was founded as a free port settlement in 1819 on behalf of the East India Company by the energetic globetrotter and former governor of Java, Sir Stamford Raffles. The population of the island was about 1,000 at the time, but with its strategic location, deep natural harbour, reliable fresh water supply, readily available timber for the repair of ships, and Raffles' enlightened leadership, it proved to be a good place to trade and live. Within 5 years, Singapore's population had risen tenfold. Within 50, it was 100,000. The British, of course, went on to make a hash of Singapore, when in 1942, and with many more troops than the enemy, they failed to stop a brutal Japanese invasion. My father was one of the British soldiers who fought the Japanese back through Burma, while Singapore, as valuable as ever, remained in enemy hands until September 1945, some weeks after atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I don't think either Raffles, for all his flair, or even the industrious Japanese could have imagined just how Singapore would flower in the second half of the 20th century. Vacant factories aside, we met people in Singapore who were ambitious, wanted to make things, and wanted to grow their businesses. This entrepreneurial spirit was second to none. By moving manufacturing to Southeast Asia, we would have the advantage of having all our suppliers around us, local to us, which is important from a logistics point of view. It is also important from the point of view of improving quality and driving innovation. You can manufacture good quality, pioneering technology much more readily when you sit side by side with your suppliers, rather than 10,000 miles away in a different time zone. We quickly found very cooperative suppliers who went out of their way to help us. And despite what local and national press and media said back at home, we were not going to Southeast Asia for cheap labour. If we'd wanted that, we would have joined the rush that was underway back then to China. We were pushed at home by the inflexibility of the labour market, the 21-year commitment to factory leases, problems with planning, and the sheer time it took to build a new factory that was making life in England problematic. We had only one supplier left in the UK for hoses, whereas all our other suppliers were in Asia. When our volume reached a certain level, the UK hose manufacturer did not want to make any more. He would have to have taken on more labour and a new factory, neither of which he was willing to do. I do not entirely blame him, as the risks he would run by committing to 21-year factory leases and not being able to flex his labour force were too great. This prompted us to find an alternative supplier in Malaysia. What we needed was highly skilled labour, and Singapore excels in this regard. Between here and Malaysia, we were able to make things very quickly and to very high quality, and we could employ brilliant locally trained engineers. Since engineering is embraced and celebrated in the region, it was really exciting to go there to manufacture and to find ourselves working in real partnerships with local people who had passion for what they did. We also came across politicians who themselves were often industrialists, with a knowledge of manufacturing, and thus far more sympathetic to what we were trying to do than were the vast majority of their distant cousins in Westminster, who have no experience of industry and little or no interest in making things. By going to Southeast Asia, we also learned a huge amount about what Asian consumers wanted. Asia is the fastest growing world market, and half our sales already come from there. Europe is also a fast-growing market for Dyson, very important and very enjoyable, but we must take an equitable view of world markets. Asia is growing at 3 times the rate of Western economies, and whereas the EU share of world trade is declining from 15 to 9%, Asia's share is rising from 16 to 25%. Furthermore, it would be arrogant to think that we can design for Asian consumers from Malmesbury. All countries have different attitudes and needs, so we needed engineers in Japan, Korea, China, Singapore and Malaysia developing products for those different markets. In fact, since we've been in Singapore and Malaysia, we have balanced our research on products for the Asian market with those of other markets, feeding this back to Britain and so to the European market too, because, aside from their appreciation of well-made products, people in this part of the world are fanatical about cleaning. Our manufacturing expansion was therefore in parallel with the rapid commercial growth we achieved as we began selling Dyson in Taiwan, the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia and South Korea. South Korea has become one of our biggest and fastest growing markets. In Korea, many people vacuum their homes twice a day, so they want small, light products that are readily to hand and easy to use. Along with cleanliness, there's also an extraordinary culture of beauty in Korea, influencing consumers elsewhere in Asia. This was something we didn't understand at first, yet when we launched the supersonic hairdryer in Seoul, sales went through the roof. We followed up in 2019 with a Korean research lab dedicated to personal care products. Here, our engineering and technology teams meet and work with our customers face to face. Our scanning electron microscope and hair mapping analysis evaluate the condition of hair, and while making recommendations on treatments, the data contributes to future product development. This might seem odd to anyone not used to the idea of engineers and technologists at work in a beauty laboratory, but this direct human insight leads to entirely new ideas. We have been inventing new technology products like the Dyson Coral hair straightener as a result. I admit that I was nervous about entering China. We had experienced much plagiarism there, and I was unsure if it would be a good market for our designs. I shouldn't have been. The Chinese love new technology and the latest designs, while the Chinese authorities are taking IP protection increasingly seriously and driving progress in many ways other countries could learn from. The criminal prosecutions that have been handed out there in relation to counterfeits of Dyson products are some of the most significant seen in the country. In one raid in 2020, 35 counterfeiters were arrested and 277 hairdryers, along with accessories, packaging material and other items, were seized. The Shanghai courts subsequently delivered guilty verdicts, prison terms and fines for the 4 principal offenders and 31 accomplices. We set up office in Shanghai, and I did our launch there in an old steel factory. I like the contrast of disused industrial buildings with our new technology and design. We partnered with a delightful company called Jebsen, supplying the large department stores. Gradually, we set up many of our own shops and started selling direct through the phenomena of WeChat, Alibaba and JD.com. We built up an engineering team there too. China is one of our biggest markets, as well as one of the most exciting and demanding. As with other people in Southeast Asia, the Chinese are particularly keen on air purifiers. This, interestingly, is not, as many people would assume, because the pollution levels are necessarily higher than anywhere else in the world. Rather, it is because they are educated to be acutely aware of the dangers. They are much better informed about the dangers of indoor air pollution, with the effects of formaldehyde and other VOCs registering high in their consciousness. Quite right too. Other countries have yet to catch up. When we developed air purifiers, these had to perform to a very high standard indeed to meet local expectations, and we make the same specification for the rest of the world. Where British companies used to create products for export markets, dreamed up and shaped at home, today we are living and working in those markets, viscerally aware of what people might want, and working in direct collaboration with them in terms of research, development and production. For example, we developed a Dyson Digital Slim vacuum cleaner that weighs less than 1 kilo, and the Dyson OmniGlide vacuum cleaner that has a double fluffy brush bar that can clean in all directions, especially for Japan, China and South Korea. Launched in Asia first, they will now be supplied globally. As I have explained, responding to criticism, we devised a carbon fibre brush bar to bake the static that makes dust stick to the floor. Customers in Korea and China, who often have highly polished floors, want to know when they've removed all the dust, and for them, we have developed a laser that spotlights every speck of dust, combined with a particle sizer and counter that shows just how many dust particles at each size are entering the vacuum. Being in Singapore certainly gives you a different take on the world. If you place Singapore at the centre of an atlas, you immediately understand how well it connects not just to China, Korea and Japan, or to Indonesia and the Philippines, but also to India, Australia and New Zealand, and to countries like Vietnam and Bangladesh, which are growing and developing rapidly. On Singapore's doorstep is in fact the fastest growing market area in the world, and countries with growing affluence and an appetite, as it happens, for Dyson products. The more time we spend in Singapore and Malaysia and then the Philippines, the more we became an Asian company that just happened to be owned by British people. While I'm proud to be English, started Dyson in rural England, and continue to employ thousands of people there, I've never thought of trading on flag waving. We sell our products on objective merit, on what they do, how they work, and how energy efficient they are. Dyson products sell purely on the basis of our latest technology, performance, design, and quality. Our British research and development operations are hugely important, yet as we expand in Asia, we will continue to invest heavily in research and development there too. In any case, I think there's something exciting about bringing research based in Britain and research from Asia together. The more open the world is to ideas and trade, the more innovation there will be, and potentially to everyone's benefit. The move of manufacturing to Asia meant we could continue to grow our R&D in Malmesbury. Where we had formerly assembled vacuum cleaners and washing machines, we now built semi-anechoic chambers, an EMC, electromagnetic compatibility chamber, dust labs, microbiology labs, electric motor development labs, new technology battery labs, and small-scale production. The speed, flexibility and innate drive of those who work with us in Singapore, Malaysia and the Philippines, meanwhile, means that we've been able to grow without the restrictions placed on us at home. Our product development process is now truly a 24 hours a day process, and we can design and build a new factory or research lab in 4 months from start to finish. Standards are high. Factories are often built on reclaimed land, and Singapore is justly proud of its Garden City heritage. At the outset, we needed a few Dyson expats in Singapore and Malaysia as we built up our research and engineering base. All of our leadership team is placed in Singapore, including the CEO, and nowadays we employ thousands of exceptional local people who know we're in it for the long term. We're there, and happily so. We are growing so fast every year in Asia that it would be impossible for us to keep building factories large enough. Instead, we build close relationships with owners of factories so that we can build our machines in their premises. The tooling, assembly lines and test stations are ours, and we control the purchasing and quality. We don't approach a subcontractor and say, make me a product of this or this design. We tend to go to outfits which have never made vacuum cleaners before, or hairdryers, or robots, fans, heaters, or purifiers or lights, and we teach their people to make these things using our production methods. It's a heavily engaged and involved process of learning and improvement. We need other factories because, expanding at the rate of 25% each year, we simply couldn't cope with the planning and building of new factories, even in Singapore, Malaysia and the Philippines. And we need 2 or 3 new factories every year. Today we have a staff of 15,000 and a further 100,000 people working with us. We do, though, have our own dedicated Dyson-owned factories making digital motors, heaters and batteries. These are our core technologies which we have pioneered, and even their manufacture is a major research and development project. By undertaking this manufacturing ourselves, further development and breakthroughs continue apace. They represent years of research and development. They are the inventions and technology that have enabled us to design and manufacture products that give us a quantum leap ahead of our competitors. As we recruited ever more local graduate engineers, so the teams integrated and developed their own impetus. In 2009, we moved R&D in Singapore to a larger site at the city's Alexandra Technopark. This creative hub was close to the city's central business district, and by British standards, amazingly well equipped and serviced. A part of what is so special about Singapore is that everything in terms of research, engineering, manufacturing and commerce connects within very short distances, while of course the city is connected physically to a huge and growing regional market, and thanks to excellent communications to the rest of the world. The Singapore government understands the operational needs of companies developing and manufacturing technology. It has several sovereign wealth funds specifically there to invest in new technology ideas and ventures. Intelligence from these wealth funds helps governments form their policies. Although a small island state, it has become the world's second largest exporter of technology. In 2012, we opened our first advanced and automated manufacturing facility in Singapore, known as SAM, Singapore Advanced Manufacturing. 300 autonomous robots working on automated lines produced a Dyson digital motor every 2.6 seconds. We now have 14 production lines spread across Singapore and the Philippines, the latter known as PAM. It's an amazing sight to watch the robots at work. They run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and with just an hour off for weekly maintenance. They glue the motors together with microdots of adhesive, sucking back the tiniest drop of excess glue. They spin the copper windings at amazing speeds and perform the most delicate of shaft balancing procedures. They test the motors as they make them. There are no human operators here. Our engineers, however, are always looking at how to improve the process. These lines are entirely bespoke and packed full of intellectual property, which we have to protect. They take over a year to build and are very expensive indeed, adding considerably to the cost of each motor. They represent the current state of the art and are the only way to achieve the precision we need with quality and reliability. However, we are endlessly dissatisfied and iteratively improve the process version by version. We've now passed the 100 millionth Dyson digital motor manufactured on Dyson production lines at the Philippines Advanced Manufacturing Facility. Meanwhile, just as with every space we've occupied, it didn't take long before we outgrew our space at Alexandra Technopark. In 2017, a year after we launched the Dyson Supersonic hairdryer, we opened the Singapore Technology Centre at 2 Science Park Drive. Located in the heart of Singapore's startup community and next to the National University of Singapore, there the centre's engineering teams are responsible for co-developing technologies for Dyson's growing personal care category. As in England, we work closely with a growing number of universities in Asia. In January 2019, we announced our decision to establish Dyson's global headquarters in Singapore, reflecting the fact that Asia is the centre of our operations and that this has been the case for many years. We had learned the importance of being close to and understanding our key markets, especially when it came to developing products that would suit Asian customers. This was the hub of our manufacturing and global trade, and our fastest-growing region. It is also where our CEO and our executive team were already based. We had 1,200 employees in Singapore and the same number in Malaysia. Establishing the global headquarters in Singapore simply reflected these long-term commercial developments. But no matter how brilliant I think Singapore is, research will continue in Malmesbury and at Lavington. We made it clear to the press at the time that even as we were planning this, Dyson was also investing £200 million in new buildings and test facilities at Lavington and £44 million in renewing our Malmesbury offices and upgrading laboratories there, and £31 million in the Dyson University to train the new generations of engineers of all types, which Britain, as well as Dyson, needs so very much. While in Singapore it has been relatively easy to find bright new graduate engineers, as well as highly skilled workers, the same is definitely not true in Britain. It was inevitable, I suppose, that I should be attacked in some quarters of the British media, who like to suggest that I was moving Dyson headquarters purely to lower outgoings, including tax. This just wasn't true. Both personally and corporately, and according to the Sunday Times, I am one of Britain's largest taxpayers. But the company also pays tax all over the world. Establishing the headquarters of Dyson Singapore did not change where and how the revenue and the profits of the company are taxed, and we still pay more tax in Britain than in any other country. Cost was also not a factor. In fact, Singapore is one of the most expensive countries in the world. Besides, we continue to invest heavily in Dyson operations in the UK, as well as our educational initiatives, both through loyalty and because I do believe Britain produces, while not nearly enough of them, some of the most inventive and inquiring minds anywhere in the world. With the addition of Lavington and the Dyson Institute, our Wiltshire campus has grown significantly. It will continue to do so. For me, a headquarters building should be a powerhouse of invention, experimentation, creativity, making and proving. The time had come to have a suitably inspiring space in Singapore, given its importance to the future of Dyson. That November, we agreed plans to turn Singapore's St James Power Station, an imposing building facing Keppel Harbour and the resort island of Sentosa, into our new headquarters. St James Power Station was very much an adventure when first built in the 1920s, as it will be again, with its research and engineering spaces open. It would have undoubtedly been much simpler to have moved into a brand new glass box, smart but soulless. But buildings have always been important to me, and I believe that offices should inspire people. The coach house in Bath was, I suppose, my equivalent of a San Francisco garage. In Chicago, our first offices were in the historic Montgomery Ward building, a former warehouse for America's oldest mail-order catalogue business, and the largest reinforced concrete building in the world. In Sydney, Dyson people worked for a long time in a canal-side warehouse that was originally used to store wool for export during the Second World War. In Shanghai, we started out in the French concession in a space that had become a car factory after the Communist Revolution. In Canada, Dyson people work in the aptly named Manufacturers Building, designed by Toronto architects Baldwin and Green. Lavington Airfield is also an inspiring canvas, where hidden beneath years of neglect, decay and dereliction are stories that make this space an inspiration for us all. The St James's Power Station, a steel-framed colossus, sheathed in a garb of Beaux-Arts and classical architecture, all red brick with high Roman windows, rises from what was a swampland less than a century ago. It was designed, in collaboration with the engineering firm Preece, Cardew and Ryder, by Alexander Gordon, a young Scot who came to Singapore in 1923 and was soon promoted Assistant Municipal Architect. For the St James project, Gordon shipped in a prefabricated steel frame from England, raising this on substantial concrete foundations and then wrapping the frame around with grand and civic architecture. Inside, the lofty spaces of the well-lit building are on the scale of a cathedral. It seemed exactly the right base for us in Singapore. Opened in 1927, the coal-fired power station was decommissioned in 1976. At first, it became an automated warehouse for the Port of Singapore, and then from 2006, a nightclub complex run by Dennis Fu, known as Singapore's nightlife king. On a typical weekend, between 15,000 and 20,000 clubbers raved the nights away here. Again, the building was a powerhouse, with new Thai bands making their names here alongside clubs dedicated to disco. During Fu's tenure, St James was listed as a national monument. We took up the expired lease for the building in 2019, and with Mapletree and EDAS Architects worked up a scheme showing how we could shape building-like structures within the immense spaces of the building, animating these without affecting the existing fabric. For half a century, the occasional power failure aside, St James worked around the clock to provide Singapore with electricity. It then worked 24 hours a day for the Port That Never Sleeps, and all through the night for Dennis Fu's 11 clubs under one roof. Now, it will be headquarters open all hours for Dyson engineers and scientists to focus on power electronics, energy storage, sensors, vision systems, embedded software, robotics, AI, machine learning, and connected devices. Construction work on the power station slowed during the 2020 COVID-19 lockdowns, delaying our move. Our factories had to stop work too, and our stock around the world ran down rapidly. We first saw the effects of lockdown in China as early as late January 2020, and could see the recession looming large on the horizon. We knew what we had to do: change everything. Fortunately, over the past 3 years, we have been striving to sell more products direct to our customers ourselves, either online or through Dyson demo stores. By early 2021, we had 356 Dyson stores. We have been opening around the world so that customers can try our Dyson products in the best possible way. There are 2 reasons for this. First, we like to have a direct relationship with our customers, who are buying our product for which we are responsible, and we want to know how we can help them. Secondly, retailers around the world are declining in numbers and sales. They are nothing like the force they were, due of course to the decline of the high street and the rise of internet shopping. If you want to buy from a website, why not buy from the Dyson website? Why not deal directly with the manufacturer? Since we're now selling direct and are not dependent on the retail buyers, we can offer special products. Online, we can do one-on-one demonstrations. In a typical Dyson demo store, you can see special demonstrations, buy special versions, and even have your hair styled for free. In early February 2020, therefore, when shops around the world were closing as a result of COVID-19, we accelerated our direct sales on our websites and continued to open Dyson demo stores. Early on with the C-Truck, I found it fascinating to explain and discuss products, their technology, and their performance with potential customers, and indeed customers who are already using them. That's why I enjoy doing product launches so much, as does Jake. It is important to my family as the owners that we stand up to explain Dyson inventions and why the technology will make a difference. We have a passion for developing new technology and bringing out different products, which we would like to share with each market. And I like to hear reactions firsthand. I'm very lucky that I have excellent people to run the commercial side of Dyson, leaving me fairly free to concentrate on engineering. I enjoyed the experience too of launching Dyson products in India, an Asian market we've entered only recently. Since 2017, we've sold Dyson products in India, including the Dyson V11 cordless handheld vacuum cleaners, with a runtime of 60 minutes, our hair dryers and stylers, our cooling fans and purifiers, and the Dyson Light Cycle task lamp. The last of these, designed by Jake, is a revolution in lighting, providing light that adjusts automatically, colour, temperature and brightness, to suit local conditions and personal preferences. The ingenious cooling of its LED lamps will ensure these have a very long life. It took 90 engineers 2 years and 892 prototypes to get it as Jake wanted it. India is a country of engineers, so there is great appreciation of highly engineered products. There's a whole new market in India of young professionals living in city apartments and without traditional domestic help. But while the market is sophisticated, living conditions in Indian cities are blighted as much or even more by pollution as they are by high humidity and blazing heat. We have the right products, but because there are no department stores or the equivalent of Carrefour or Costco to stock them, we went straight for direct sales from our website and our own Dyson shops. I had been prepared to an extent for conditions in India. I visited the country in 2016 as part of a trade mission with Theresa May, the British Prime Minister at the time. To keep my Delhi hotel room cool and free of acrid smog, I had 5 air purifiers on the go at the same time. Mrs. May sent one of our staff along the corridor to ask if she could borrow one for her room. I think we knew we had a potential winner with the air purifier. And being located in Asia, we're constantly learning about other cultures and engaging with them. It's exciting, and it keeps us on our toes. Dyson has become as much an Asian business as a British one. Our products are sold in 83 countries around the world, so we are arguably a truly global company. Having started in Britain and consistently grown in Britain, we for some time now sell over 95% of our products in our other global markets. We will, I hope, continue to expand in countries like Indonesia, Vietnam, and elsewhere. As we enjoy these markets, though, it will be with a sense of adventure, excitement, and openness as we engage and learn from other cultures. This global perspective encouraged me to back Britain's departure from the European Union. I do believe that Britain needs to be free to operate competitively around the world, a belief rooted in common sense and personal experience. In 2016, Dyson exported 19% of its output to Europe and 81% to the rest of the world. The fastest expanding markets lay overseas and even across uncharted waters. The EU's free movement of people, meanwhile, has been unable to bring Dyson the engineers it needs in Britain. We were not allowed to employ them unless they were from the EU. If we wanted to hire a foreign engineer, it took 4.5 months, if we were lucky, to go through Home Office procedures. Hopefully, all this will now change and we can recruit globally. This local difficulty is compounded by the fact that 60% of engineering postgraduates and 60% of those engaged in engineering research in British universities are from outside the EU. After their studies, what does Britain do for or with them? We chuck them out, that's what. Why on earth would you send engineering graduates, researchers and doctorates packing when they have valuable technology at their fingertips that they take back to countries like China and use to compete against us? I believe that Britain is not compatible with EU institutions. we do not understand their lobbying and their workings. The EU countries do not like our interference and are expressing different views. They're used to getting their own way. This is most obvious in their drive for ever greater integration and breakdown of each country's powers, except that they have a way of finding their way around any agreement or undertaking that they find awkward. While we value our legal independent sovereignty, they see the greater good of further integration if they can each avoid complying when it matters to them. In short, it is an incompatible marriage. Dyson has been sitting on the International Electrotechnical Commission, the IEC, the industrial body, a committee of electrical appliance manufacturers that meets to agree on standards and standards tests, for the past 25 years, so we have experience of the shenanigans and goings-on. For example, I have been fighting a legal battle with the EU itself since 2014 over their adoption of energy label performance data that breaches their own EU laws and unfairly benefits one group, in itself illegal, in this case the German vacuum cleaner industry body. I'm afraid this requires a bit of explanation. For a long time, indeed I believe we were the very first manufacturer to do so, we had supported a very sensible regulation that proposed placing a cap on the energy wattage of vacuum cleaners sold in Europe. This, it seemed to us, was a good way of incentivizing manufacturers to make more efficient machines. It would compel companies to invest in research and development to use every joule of energy increasingly more efficiently. Other manufacturers, our competitors, did not like this approach. I can only assume this was because they did not have motors that were as efficient as ours. They therefore lobbied for an energy label that was based on a complicated matrix of lab-based tests, none of which included dust. The result was a regulation that stipulated that the energy performance of vacuum cleaners should be tested for efficiency when the machines were empty and unused. I don't need to tell you that it is nothing like the real world. Dyson machines are engineered to have constant performance, and we test them in real-life conditions using many different varieties of dust and other detritus. This is manifestly not the case with other products, particularly bag machines, where the energy performance drops as the bag fills with dust and the pores clog. Once the regulations came into effect, many vacuum cleaners sold around Europe quickly started sporting a green A-grade label for energy consumption and efficiency, as conferred by the European Commission test criteria. However, when you got them home and started using them, their bags and filters started clogging up with dust. Our subsequent testing showed that the efficiency of some of these would fall as low as a G grade while in use. In short, the performance you were promised on the label, and based on which you purchased the machine, was not what you got at home. It was conning the consumer and putting us at a commercial disadvantage. Some manufacturers went even further and engineered their way around the cap on motor wattage, which came into effect at the same time. They used electronics to ensure their machines used a low motor wattage when empty and in a test state, but ramped up as soon as the product was used in real life, thus appearing more efficient than they were. We were forced to bring a judicial review against the European Commission and multiple cases against our competitors. The regulation, we argued, was unfairly discriminating against Dyson. We pointed out to the court that the performance of bag machines dropped off and continued to fall the moment the bags started to fill with dust. Thus, the real use, or in-home performance, was emphatically worse and not as stated on their energy labels. So the consumer was being grossly misled. Our plight revealed the complexity of European justice. Our case was initially rejected by the European General Court in November 2015. The court accepted the Commission's rather odd argument that dust-loaded testing was not reliable or repeatable. This was despite the fact that the International Electrotechnical Commission had long devised just such a dust-loaded test, widely adopted by consumer test bodies and manufacturers worldwide. We appealed, and in May 2017, the European Court of Justice found that the General Court manifestly distorted the position taken by Dyson. It failed to take into account certain items of evidence, infringed its obligations to state reasons, erred in law, and distorted the facts and failed to comply with its duty to give reasons. Coming from a court, this is pretty strong stuff. What's more, in its ruling, the European Court of Justice also directed that the energy test must adopt, where technically possible, a method of calculation which makes it possible to measure the energy performance of vacuum cleaners in conditions as close as possible to actual conditions in use. Eventually, on appeal, the General Court agreed with Dyson and annulled the regulation. To begin with, and despite having a strong case, the odds have been stacked against us. I am told that overturning an EU regulation has only occurred on a handful of occasions. We stuck at it to defend our product, and in the process shone a light on the murky practices that some companies will resort to, and the dark arts of lobbying in Europe. As part of our necessary investigations, we were required to use Freedom of Information requests to obtain correspondence between German manufacturers and a commissioner in which they were lobbying the EU to further their interests at the expense of their rivals. Meanwhile, representations by European consumer groups were ignored. The case cost Dyson hundreds of millions, not to mention the time and distraction when we would have far preferred to get on with developing new products. Now we're in another protracted battle for damages. Yes, we brought the legal action to protect our own position from discriminatory regulation, but fundamentally, this was about protecting consumers from misleading regulations devised by EU bureaucrats and the European manufacturers who lobby them. For me, this was the tip of the iceberg. What was the point of the UK being in the EU if the EU was undermining UK manufacturers? Wouldn't UK manufacturers and consumers be better off making their own laws as a sovereign state with free trade deals around the world? The dynamic and open-handed Singapore model would surely be much more in tune with the British character. Much has been written about the infamous non, pugnaciously declared by General de Gaulle in the 1960s, when Britain wanted to join the EEC, later the EU. It seemed unfriendly and ungracious at the time, yet he was just being honest. He understood the British, having spent 1940 to 1945 in London. The UK has a long history of global trading due to the Commonwealth and our pioneering spirit. This is a fortunate heritage and one based on free trade. The EU single market, however, is designed by Germany and France to be a single closed market protecting EU manufacturers and companies from foreign imports by imposing steep import tariffs. These are, for example, 30% for roasted coffee and farm produce, 10% on cars, and 6% on vacuum cleaners and hairdryers. This import duty, even on goods imported to the UK, goes straight to Brussels. Our entry into the EU in 1972 was a slap in the face for our former free trading partners such as Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, India, Canada, and the USA. Since we became members, our trade balance with the EU has declined, while our imports from the EU have rocketed. In other words, it was a good deal for the EU and a bad deal for the UK. Meanwhile, our exports to countries outside the EU have been rising steadily during our membership. This trend in itself makes de Gaulle's point. There are those in the UK who believe that by leaving the EU, we're inflicting an act of self-harm. I disagree. Ever since we moved our production 20 years ago to Southeast Asia, Dyson has been importing its products into the EU, which includes the UK, from outside the EU, and so paying the 6% tariff. This has not been an act of self-harm for us. In fact, Dyson sales in Europe have flourished during those 20 years. Indeed, currency fluctuations inflict far more damage than the paying of import duties. As of 2021, Britain has already signed up 63 free trade agreements around the world, putting the UK in a much better world trading position than the EU member states. In short, we have the opportunity to flourish. Furthermore, the EU would have been inflicting upon themselves an act of immense harm if they had not signed a free trade agreement with the UK, putting its surplus balance of imports into the UK of over £100 billion at risk. The fact that, at the 11th hour, the EU has agreed a free trade deal that protects its trade with Britain is a good harbinger. The EU needs this deal, and on this basis it will flourish. I have a feeling that our more-than-arm's-length relationship, where we have to work things out diplomatically rather than being trapped inside, will lead to a new spirit of cooperation. I hope so. Like so many British people, I have always loved travelling through Europe and having businesses in European countries, not to mention the home I've had in France for many years. Chapter 5. The Coach House. In February 1979, I was free to go my own way. In one sense, it was all a bit of a disaster. I had no job, no income, and a sizable mortgage to pay off. Financially, things looked bleak. Deirdre and I had recently moved to a half-finished, early 19th century house at Bath Ford, 3 miles east of Bath. By now, we had 3 children, the youngest Sam, 6 months old. I would, in fact, have no real income, just an escalating overdraft, until the sale, 5 years later, of the license of the vacuum cleaner I invented and made to Amway, an American marketing company based in Michigan. As for the British economy, things were not exactly rosy in 1979. The year had begun in the depths of the bitterly cold winter of discontent. The average temperature for January and February across Britain was below freezing, when lorry drivers, ambulance drivers, railway workers, refuse collectors and even gravediggers went on strike. To the backdrop of IRA bombing campaigns, there was talk of yet another recession. James Callaghan's Labour government appeared out of touch and out of control. The Tories were voted into power with a large majority that spring, with the formidable Margaret Thatcher as Prime Minister. Strange as it may seem, and although money was a constant worry, life didn't seem as tough as perhaps it might have been. Deirdre and I had a handsome house, even if it did need quite a bit of work, our 3 lovely children, aged 9 down to 1, and the family retriever. We grew our own vegetables and had a large garden that the children made good use of. Deirdre made clothes, ran art classes, and sold her paintings. We couldn't afford glamorous holidays, and yet in many ways it was an idyllic time. We had huge energy, and I knew what I wanted to do, and was getting on with it. This was my cyclonic vacuum cleaner. The idea had been in my head since welding up the giant metal cyclone for the ball bearer factory. Now it made increasing sense. Here was a field, the vacuum cleaner industry, where there had been no innovation for years, so the market ought to be ripe for something new. And because houses needed cleaning throughout the year, a vacuum cleaner is not, like my ball bearer, a seasonal product. It is also recession-proof. Every household needs one. It seemed to tick all the boxes. In any case, I'd used one since childhood and knew from experience that there had to be a better vacuum cleaner. For the following 15 years, I lived in debt. This might not sound encouraging to young inventors with an entrepreneurial spirit. Yet if you believe you can achieve something, whether as a long-distance runner or maker of a wholly new type of vacuum cleaner, then you have to give the project 100% of your creative energy. You have to believe that you'll get there in the end. You need determination, patience, and willpower. Never for a moment, though, had I thought, I know, one day I'll set up in business making and selling vacuum cleaners, and even if it takes me 15 years to make a profit, then that's the way to go. What happened was that when I was making the ball bearer, in fact not long after I built the cyclone for the ball bearer factory, I bought a new vacuum cleaner. At home we had a reconditioned Hoover Junior, the classic upright styled by Henry Dreyfus, the famous American industrial designer, and made at the Art Deco Hoover factory on Western Avenue at Perivale. But I thought we ought to have a modern cleaner, and Hoover had a new model that looked like a flying saucer. It was said to be the world's most powerful. When I set to work with it one Saturday, it screamed away, yet appeared to have very little suction. I knew the bag must be full, but because we didn't have a spare, I took the old one out, opened the end, tipped the contents into the dustbin, and sealed the end of the empty bag with Scotch tape. Back it went into the flying saucer. Still no suction. I got into the car to go and buy some new bags. With a new bag installed, suction returned. I wanted to know the difference between a new bag and an old empty bag. When I opened the old empty bag again, the penny dropped. What I hadn't realised, and should have done as an engineer, was that a vacuum cleaner bag is not just a depository for the dust. It acts as a filter, trapping the dust inside the bag and allowing the air to pass through the pores of the bag. The bag full indicator is not a bag full indicator at all. It is a bag clogged indicator. It registers the pressure as the pores of the bag clog, announcing that the bag is full when it actually means that the pores of the bag are clogged. And this could occur when there was only a very small amount of dust in the bag. This is very significant. Because the airflow has to pass through the bag, becoming clogged from the moment the first dust enters, the airflow becomes reduced also, and this means a drastic drop in suction and cleaning ability. As an engineer, I found this interesting. As a consumer, I felt cheated, even angry. This anger festered for several months. I remembered the same clogging problem on the calico cloth with the powder coating in the ball bearer factory, and the giant cyclone we had made to solve it. What if I could develop a much smaller version and replace the clogging bag in a vacuum cleaner? I tried to interest my fellow directors and shareholders at the ball bearer company in the concept of a cyclonic and bagless vacuum cleaner with its promise of an end to clogging and loss of suction. No such luck. If it was such a great idea, they said, Hoover or Electrolux would have been making it already. And oh, by the way, you're fired. As the ball bearer company had raised money and issued shares to keep going, my stake in the company had fallen. I was powerless. Now, in 1979, at home on my own, I was eager to see how a cyclone might perform in miniature. I quickly made one from cardboard, of similar shape to the metal one we had made at the ball bearer factory, but only 300 millimetres instead of 10 metres high, and held together with gaffer tape. I replaced the cloth bag hanging from the handle of my upright vacuum cleaner with this simple cyclone. As I pushed it around the house several times, it seemed to work, collecting dust, fluff, and our retriever's hair in the cyclone, although I had no idea of its engineering efficacy. I went to see Jeremy to show him my idea. He was very keen to support me, and we did a business plan and a budget for its development. He would put up £25,000, or 49% of the equity, leaving me to find a similar amount for my 51%. If I could, I would have control of my own company. Jeremy said he had no interest in kicking me out. He also said that because we were both engineers and designers, we should restrict ourselves to developing the vacuum cleaner and then selling the idea on, rather than manufacturing it ourselves. Deirdre and I raised £26,000 for our 51% of the equity by selling our precious vegetable garden as a building plot, and borrowing the rest of the money from the manager at Lloyd's Bank in Chipping Sodbury. This was the same manager who had arranged for us to take the photo of Deirdre pushing the ball bearer at Doddington Park. Luckily, I had an old 18th century coach house at home to serve as a workshop. I should explain that one half of the building had been designed to house 2 horse-driven coaches, and the other half to house the horses, with a hayloft above. It was smelly and rotten at first, but beginning with my building a wooden bench fitted with a vice, it quickly began to look and act the part. I bought a set of antique sheet metal rollers so I could roll prototype cyclones out of brass before soldering or riveting these together. I could make a cyclone a day, not always a completely new one, sometimes a modification. One of the really important principles I learned to apply was changing only one thing at a time, and to see what difference that one change made. People think that a breakthrough is arrived at by a spark of brilliance, or even a eureka thought in the bath. I wish it were for me. Eureka moments are very rare. More usually, you start off by testing a particular setup, and by making one change at a time, you start to understand what works and what fails. By that empirical means, you begin the journey towards making the breakthrough, which usually happens in an unexpected way. You do need to have bright ideas or be willing to try the unthinkable along the journey. But trying to rush by testing a brainwave rarely works. Brunel, one of my great heroes, is said to be the father of modern research and development, after he painstakingly developed the ship's propeller, making just one change at a time. Luckily, the records of his workbooks have survived at Bristol University. Although exacting, this development journey is exciting. There were to be lots of setbacks over the next 5 years. This was my personal pilgrim's progress, with plenty of ups and downs, false turns, and many, many failures along the way. My first experiment, mating our Hoover Junior to my homespun cardboard cyclonic extractor, had shown that my simple cyclone did collect some dust. From now on, the serious business of developing the technology of the cyclone would begin. Once the heart of the cleaner was completed, I could move on to developing the remainder of the vacuum cleaner. I discovered as I started to make prototype cyclones that there were two apparently insurmountable problems. First, the state of the art was clear and confirmed by literature. Cyclones were only efficient down to dust particles of 20 microns in size. Yet household dust is very fine at half a micron, or smaller, similar to cigarette smoke. Secondly, the traditional cyclone shape would not trap or separate carpet fluff or human hair. These simply flew out of the air exit with the exhaust air. At this stage, anyone watching me at work might reasonably have wondered why Electrolux and Hoover weren't making and selling a vacuum cleaner like mine. With all their resources, surely they could have leapt ahead of me, one man as a dog as it were in a rural coach house, and cornered the market between them. There were, though, at least 3 good reasons why they didn't even think of pursuing a similar path to me. One, which went without saying, was that the no loss of suction vacuum cleaner had yet to be invented. The second was that the vacuum cleaner bag replacement business was highly profitable. And the third, rather to my surprise, was that well-established electrical goods companies seemed remarkably uninterested in new technology. With no outside challenges, they could afford to rest on their laurels, for the moment at least. I buried myself in my own world of prototyping. It's a part of the Dyson story that I made 5,127 prototypes to get to a model that I could set about licensing. This is indeed the exact number. Testing and making just one change after another was time-consuming. This, though, was necessary, as I needed to follow up and prove or disprove every theory I had. And however frustrating, I refused to be defeated by failure. All of the 5,126 prototypes I rejected, 5,126 so-called failures, were part of the process of discovery and improvement before getting it right on the 5,127th time. Failure, as I had already begun to learn with my experience with the Woolberry business, is very important. I find it important to repeat that we do, or certainly should, learn from our mistakes, and we should be free to make them. Of course, if like me, you're lucky to have someone willing to back you up day to day for 5 years, as Deirdre did, you are far less likely to give up. It was also very much a family affair. The children came and worked alongside me in the coach house. Among other things, we built skateboard ramps, vacuum forming machines, and desk lamps. Making things was an enormously pleasurable part of our lives, as well as necessary, because we couldn't afford them otherwise. Jake made a sledge that he could sit inside with front skis that steered. Sam made an ironing board that folded very simply and easily without the need for annoying catches. He used gas struts designed to hold up car boot lids. Emily made a spring diving board for the swimming pool I had built in the garden. In this demanding yet engrossing and enjoyable process of evolving thousands of prototypes, I gained a great deal of knowledge about cyclonic technology. However, like Jeremy Fry, I am cautious of experts. While developing the dual cyclone vacuum cleaner, I went to see a scientist, R.G. Dorman, at the notorious Porton Down government research station near Salisbury. Dorman had written a book, Dust Control and Air Cleaning, published in 1974 by Robert Maxwell's Pergamon Press, and was considered the leading expert on the subject of cyclonic extraction. A very nice chap, he told me that the current art was good down to 20 microns, but I knew that for a domestic vacuum cleaner, this figure needed to be 0.3 microns, a third of a micron. This, of course, was considered impossible. So I set about to bring that figure down myself because I needed to, and because part of me wanted to prove the official experts wrong. Actually, I was helped with a maths for the cyclone by Paul Columbet, my former maths teacher and housemaster from Gresham's, and my godmother's husband, who came to stay on their way to Devon. In Dorman's book, there were 5 different mathematical calculations to determine the efficiency of cyclones, of different dimensions, at various airflows and particle sizes. Paul Columbet started me off calculating the mass, and not surprisingly, as I worked through the equations, each scientist had a different theorem and different answers. They were no help or shortcut. I would have to go through empirical testing to find the answers for myself, as well as taking the state-of-the-art to new heights. In the end, after 5,127 prototypes, we managed to do what the expert view had deemed impossible. Experts tend to be confident that they have all the answers, and because of this trait, they can kill new ideas. But when you're trying to break new ground, you have no interest in getting stuck in engineering conventions or intellectual mud. In any case, as Jacob Bronowski, the Polish-born British mathematician and historian, said in his 1973 BBC television series The Ascent of Man, science is a very human form of knowledge. We're always at the brink of the known. We always feel forward for what is to be hoped. Every judgment in science stands on the edge of error and is personal. Science is a tribute to what we can know, although we are fallible. This is why I've long had great admiration for engineers like Alec Hissagonis and André Lefebvre of Citroën, who gave us the Citroën Traction Avant, the Deux Chevaux, the DS, and the HY corrugated delivery van, among many other radical engineering designs that the public responded so positively to. They questioned orthodoxy, experimented, took calculated risks, stood on the edge of error, and got things right. And when they got there, they continued to ask questions. The brief for the Citroën Deux Chevaux, set by Citroën's vice president Pierre Boulanger, himself a distinguished engineer, to Lefebvre and his team, was for a motorised horse and cart that would take a farmer and his wife to market along rutted and muddy lanes, crossing ploughed fields, with baskets of eggs on board without breaking a single one. They solved this problem by having a very long suspension arm to each light wheel that then gave the wheels a long and soft travel. As for the look of the car, this didn't seem to matter, although in fact Citroën stylist Flaminio Bertoni, a sculptor before turning to industrial design, ensured that it had a very special and endearing appearance, very much of its own, and one that was smoothed out slowly over the Deux Chevaux' long production run. All this required truly original thinking. The Deux Chevaux was in production for 42 years, and like Hissagonis' Mini, it has never lost its appeal. These engineers thought freely and independently, and had the ability to see radical designs into production, and even if this was not their intention, into the history books too. At the same time as visiting R.G. Dorman at Porton Down, I read Jim Slater's book, The Zulu Principle, published in 1978. Slater was a British accountant and investor who rode the waves of investment finance with a number of great successes, although he had his downs as well as his ups. His approach to winning investment, he wrote, was to become a leading authority on a clearly defined and narrow area of knowledge. Following the Zulu principle, this can be achieved remarkably quickly. Jim Slater's son, Mark, helped research the Zulu principle. I got to know him, admired the investment business he built up, and in 2014 invited him to join the board of Weybourne, the holding company of Dyson Operations. Slater had been intrigued when, after reading a single article on the Zulu people in a copy of Reader's Digest, his wife's knowledge of Zulus far exceeded his own. If, he reckoned, she read all the books she could find on the subject and made a quick trip to South Africa to meet Zulu people, she would soon be considered a leading authority. I suppose I did this in a way with the cyclonic technology. Over a period of 4 years, I had built and tested more cyclone dust separators than most cyclone experts. My quest was to increase the ability of this cyclone to trap ever smaller microscopic particles. During the process of testing the 5,000 plus prototypes of the cyclone, I determined the correct angle of the conical section, the best diameter of the cyclone, the best inlet and outlet diameter, the ideal entry duct shape, and the best length of cyclone outlet. By late 1982, I had a fully working prototype of the critical cyclonic portion of my vacuum cleaner. I now turn my thoughts to the machine as a whole. At the time, there were two sorts of vacuum cleaner, an upright and a cylinder one. The upright type had a rotating brush roll in the cleaner head, and you pushed the machine. But it had no means of cleaning anything other than carpets, and it failed to clean right to the skirting. Nor did it have much suction. A cylinder cleaner, which you pulled across the floor via the wand and the hose, had strong suction with a new bag, but usually had just a passive floor tool and was less effective on carpet, though good for cleaning above the floor. I decided to put a cylinder cleaner type motor into my brush-rolled upright to have good suction, and have a permanently attached stretch hose to match the cylinder version at cleaning the edges of the floors and above them. That way my cleaner could compete with either version. The handle for my cleaner could be detached from the body and telescope within the stretch hose, reaching over 4 meters from the machine, with an automatic changeover valve to divert the suction from the cleaner head to the hose and vice versa. No fiddling about, just a quick draw in Western parlance. Having designed and built my vacuum cleaner, I set about patenting the new features and the cyclonic inventions. This was most important, though patents, devised under Henry IV with little change since, are most unsatisfactory and provide scant protection for the inventor. Nevertheless, it was a prerequisite for my next step, which was to try to license the design with all the major British, European and American vacuum cleaner manufacturers. Hoover wanted me to sign a piece of paper saying anything that came out of a discussion with them belonged to them. I didn't sign, and that was the end of my collaboration with Hoover. They did, though, send their European Vice President, Mike Rutter, to appear in 1995 on the BBC's Money programme to say that Hoover regretted not buying my invention because they would have put it on the shelf, ensuring that it never saw the light of day. Charming. I went to see Electrolux, Hotpoint, Miele, Siemens, Bosch, AEG, Philips, the lot, and was rejected by every one of them. Although frustrating, what I did learn is that none of them was interested in doing something new and different. They were, as I had already understood, more interested in defending the vacuum cleaner bag market, worth more than $500 million in Europe alone at the time. Here, though, was an opportunity. Might consumers be persuaded to stop spending so much on replacement bags, which, by the way, are made of spun plastic and are not biodegradable, and opt for a bagless vacuum cleaner that offered constant suction instead? If so, I might stand a chance against these established companies. Rotork, who had seen what I was doing, took a license on my design. We had it made by Zanussi in Pordenone, Italy, and sold at home through door-to-door Clean Easy sales reps brandishing product catalogues, and at the Ideal Home exhibitions of 1983 and 1984. This was the pink Clean Easy Rotork Cyclone, its colour chosen to emphasise its difference from all other vacuum cleaners on the market. It cost about £1,000 in 2021 money. Around 550 were made. I believe that Rotork chose Clean Easy as a partner because they did not wish to be involved in selling the cleaner, and also because selling vacuum cleaners door-to-door was a tried and tested method that had long worked for well-established companies like Kirby in the United States and Vorwerk in Germany. Clean Easy was certainly a well-known company in post-war Britain. It was based on the methods used by the Fuller Brush Company in America. In 1982, the suitcases, opened by salesmen of front doors, were replaced by catalogues, with Clean Easy remaining a successful company for some years to come. Meanwhile, having licensed the vacuum cleaner to Rotork, and while looking for other licensees, Jeremy and I established a company called Prototypes Limited to work on designs like the Squirrel four-wheel drive power-steered wheelchair with Lord Snowdon, and we revived the wheelboat project, one that we had explored at much the same time as the tube boat with Rotork Marine. By then we had 13 years' experience selling sea trucks and knew that many of them were used as patrol boats rather than as load carriers or assault craft. We thought there would be a market for a fast water jeep on wheels for the Army, Navy, police and anyone who might use a jeep-type vehicle on water. By now, instead of working from the coach house at our home, we had bought a coach house for £45,000 at the rear of the famous Royal Crescent in Bath, the licence agreement with Rotork providing the funds. It was an L-shaped Georgian building around a large cobbled courtyard. This time, I built something more resembling a test tank, rather than relying on the pond at Widcombe Manor. I had the same design of tripod and boom arm as that used 13 years earlier, but the tank was a donut-shaped trough made of plywood and lined with a large plastic sheet to make it watertight. The motor was a big electric drill with a power cable going up to a first-floor window. I could measure the power drawn by the electric motor, the speed of the wheel, the load on the wheel, and the speed of travel. The wheel was a 1/6 scale model of the full-size 3-metre version. I repeated the same tests on the pond 13 years earlier and made some progress in efficiency. However, our model water jeep was still slow. I had tried many different paddle shapes, yet I could only travel at speeds far slower than the sea trucks. Facing failure while eating my lunch one day, I recalled that the fan blades of a vacuum cleaner, instead of using a paddle-type action and shape to trap and accelerate air, actually had backward and curve-shaped blades, as though they wanted to spill the air in which they moved. However, they were efficient and worked at high speed. I wondered, what if we had the blades sloping backwards, doing the opposite to paddling the water? What would happen? I set this up and started the test. I was astonished to see the wheel, with its heavily sloped backward blades, lift out of the water and skip across the top at high speed. Now it could rival the sea truck for speed and might be faster. I did further tests to improve the efficiency and speed and filed a patent. The quick response from the Patent Office was that all the documents relating to this invention should be kept in a strong-room safe within a safe. We were not allowed to exploit it commercially, as it was considered to be of military significance. The same thing happened to Sir Christopher Cockerell with his hovercraft, and this was a bone of contention between him, and later his widow, with the Ministry of Defence. I now designed and built a full-size version of the wheel for the water jeep that I developed in the courtyard. It had a 3.3-metre wheel with a giant inner tube made of Kevlar-reinforced polyurethane skin, Kevlar being a less expensive version of carbon fibre, around a light aluminium hub. The tripod and boom arm would be mounted on a sea truck anchored in Poole Harbour. The engine driving the drive shaft, hung under the boom, would be a Ford 1600cc petrol engine with a chain reduction to the drive shaft. The single wheel, representing one of the four wheels of the vehicle, would drive round and round the anchored sea truck, testing the best paddles from the tank tests, but at full size. The result was that the 3.3-metre wheel would drive around at 30 miles an hour, carrying a 250-kilo load, using only 15 horsepower. It was a most exhilarating sight. This proved that we could build a full-size Jeep, weighing 1,000 kilos, with a 60-horsepower motor that would travel at 30 miles an hour across the water. Unfortunately, at this very point, Rotork, having sold off their marine division, were no longer interested. The project came to an end. As the wheelboat project ended, another began. Lord Snowdon, Jeremy's friend, had long bemoaned the design of motorised wheelchairs, and in particular their unsuitability for indoor use. They brought mud and other unmentionables from the outdoors into the home. They were clumsy inside the home, and they were ungainly contraptions to look at. Snowdon, who had had polio as a child, had long championed the cause of the disabled. A renowned photographer, he was also an inventor. He had previously been the instigator of a motorised platform that he designed with an engineering company. The idea was that it remained indoors, and you could fix your favourite chair on top of the platform. The controls and steering were on a single upright arm. Working with Snowdon, our brief was to design an excellent indoors chair that would perform equally well outside on roads and pavements, and without the ungainly contraption-like look of conventional motorised wheelchairs. The project began with the size of the wheels. The bigger their diameter, the bigger step they could climb. Big wheels, though, are too bulky for indoor use. We knew that if you lay a wheel on its side at, say, 45 degrees, it can mount a higher step than it will do if wholly upright. This is because the diameter described by a wheel at 45 degrees is much larger than its actual diameter. You can easily demonstrate this by taking a plate and rolling it along a floor towards a book placed in its path. The plate will find it hard to climb the book. If you then set the rolling plate at a 45-degree angle, it will mount the book more easily. We put the wheels at 60 degrees to the upright. This meant that they could be housed under the platform and hardly noticed. We also noticed that powered wheelchairs had two big motors to drive them. They were specially made, expensive and heavy. We chose much cheaper and much smaller windscreen wiper motors and mounted one on each of the four wheels. They could be smaller because we had four of them instead of the normal two. We now also had the benefit of four-wheel drive. Conventional wheelchairs have two driven fixed wheels and two caster wheels. This makes their steering somewhat unpredictable, rather like a supermarket or airport trolley. We made all four wheels steer. This gave the wheelchair predictable steering, together with a very tight turning circle. It could rotate on its own axis. Since the inside wheels have to turn more slowly than the outside wheels, a fact carefully controlled on a car, we would do the same with the added complication of full four-wheel steering. The electronics for this and the steering geometry with angled wheels was complex and an interesting pioneering step. The batteries were mounted on top of the platform and the chair on top of the batteries. The chair I designed folded up for transport. The platform with the angled wheels made a second unit, and the heavy batteries the third. These were easily put into the boot of a car, which is exactly what I did when taking it by British Airways to Nice, and from there in a Renault 5 hire car up to Jeremy Fry's Provençal village high in the Basque Alps. There, it was to be tested by a wheelchair-using friend of Jeremy's. Everything went well until he wanted to drive up a rocky mountain path. He needed a Land Rover to do that, not an indoor wheelchair. However, I still believe that Lord Snowdon's original brief for an indoor chair was the right one. We had made a wheelchair with barely visible wheels, looking like a Charles Eames-type chair mounted on a low platform with remarkable and predictable steering. It certainly had no similarity to, nor the stigma, of normal-powered wheelchairs. I left the project to concentrate on the vacuum cleaner, while Jeremy and others focused on the wheelchair. Afterwards, when they changed the wheels back to conventional ones, I thought this was going to make it much the same as other wheelchairs. Although it did go into production as the Squirrel, it failed commercially. Commercially, the Cyclone upright vacuum cleaner was not a success either. Unfortunately, Rotork chose the wrong man to run the operation. He happened to be its financial director. One of the problems as an inventor licensing other companies is that while they might be keen when you sign the license, they may decide, for various reasons, to drop it later on. It is a most frustrating experience for a licensor. I needed to look for other licensees. Black & Decker expressed an initial interest, as did several other American companies, including Amway, a marketing company from Ada, Michigan. Founded in 1959 by Jay Van Andel and Rich DeVos, is named short for American Way. They sent a really nice Australian vice president to see us in Bath. He was charming, and I still correspond with him in his retirement in Australia. Spun a good line, and in April 1984 we licensed Amway, who were to get a company called Bissell to make the vacuum cleaner in nearby Grand Rapids, Michigan. After I'd spent time there with Amway and Bissell the manufacturer, and handed over all the drawings, prototypes, know-how and confidential information, they decided to cancel our agreement and to instigate a fraud lawsuit to get back the money they'd paid us. It would have been very hard and potentially disastrous from a financial point of view to fight Amway in the US courts, during which time we would have been unable to license it to anyone else. Amway had a very tough Bronx lawyer, a barracuda we were told, with an education. In 1984, Jeremy said, "Settle it, I don't want to fight a lawsuit." We gave all the money back to Amway and paid our legal expenses. This put me heavily in debt. At the same time, Jeremy's financial advisor, who thought the vacuum cleaner was a complete waste of time and money, encouraged him to sell out. I was able to fund all this and to buy Jeremy out by selling the coach house behind the Royal Crescent to Chris Patten, the Conservative MP for Bath, and borrowing yet more money from Chipping Sodbury Lloyd's Bank. Although I now had 100% of the shares, I was sad that Jeremy had decided to cease his involvement. I understood the scare of the lawsuit, and particularly that he had more to lose than me. After all, it was my invention and my headache. I was extremely grateful for his support, and we remained very good friends. And then, serendipity played its part. TWA's In-Flight magazine had placed a juicy photograph of the pink and lavender Cyclone on its inside back cover to accompany a feature article opposite. This is what had got the vacuum cleaner noticed in the States. By the same token, a tiny Japanese company called Apex, that imported high-end design from Italy and Switzerland, along with a Filofax from England, saw a solitary photograph of the Cyclone in a glossy product design book. "Come and see us," they said. In January 1985, I bought a cheap ticket to Tokyo, flying there by Aeroflot, the Soviet airline, via Moscow. Japan really was another world then. When I first went to the Apex office, the girls pointed at my nose. "You have nose like Eiffel Tower." This, I learnt, was a compliment, although it seemed such a bizarre thing to say, especially when meeting someone for the first time, even if my English nose was much more prominent than theirs. After a few weeks, one of the girls asked me if I'd like to come out in the evening to drink beer with them, which seemed an unusual thing to do at the time. I was looking forward to it, but just before it was time to go, the chairman asked me to play Scalextrics with him at the office instead, a less interesting social experience. A most refreshing experience, however, was Apex's approach to the vacuum cleaner. They loved it, appreciating every component and the fact that it was different. They took it apart, studied it, and understood it. Theirs was a real love of technology, of making things, and artifacts. It was great to be appreciated. I spent a lot of time in Japan redesigning the cleaner head of the vacuum cleaner and improving the separation system by adding a shroud after the first cyclone to trap hairs and fine carpet fluff. Apex wanted to keep the pink and lavender colours, as these would make ours stand out from existing vacuum cleaners, and they happened to like them. It was put into production by Silver Seiko Limited, a company that made well-known silver reed typewriters and knitting machines. Apex called it G-Force. It went on the market in 1986 and sold for 250,000 yen, something like £2,000 today. A status symbol in Japan, it became an instant design classic. Because it was licensed in Japan, and accounting there was truly inscrutable, we never knew how many were sold, but it was clearly much liked, continuing into production until 1998. It was while I was away on my first trip to Japan that a squirrel gnawed through a water tank pipe in the roof at home. Water cascaded through the whole house and the ceilings came down. Deirdre and the children had to deal with it in rough camping conditions. I got back home without, as yet, a license agreement, that came later, to find a wrecked house, and for all my efforts and travels, absolutely no income. It was terrifying at the time. Sleepless nights, the lot. But the agreement did finally come through, and with it, upfront money that saved us from ruin. Not long afterwards, I first met Paul Smith at his Covent Garden shop. He wanted to sell the G-Force. I imported machines for Japan for him so that he could sell them in his British shops. Paul displayed the G-Force in between clothes in a long line across his shop windows. He was my first UK customer, and he quickly sold the lot. I had only imported 200 machines. With hindsight, we should have imported many more. It was my fault. I didn't want to be an importer at the time. With the Japanese G-Force in production, I went to the USA and spent some time trying to license American and Canadian companies. In one way, it was really interesting to learn how the market for vacuum cleaner and suction carpet cleaners could be so different in other countries. But on the other hand, the tricky negotiations and legal aspects of potential deals were often excruciating. On one flight back from the States, I was sitting next to a businessman called Jeff Pike, and we discovered that we had shared interest, not least the latest Fay Weldon novel we both happened to be reading. Jeff's main business interest was oil exploration in Canada, but he was also chairman of a company called Iona Appliances, with headquarters in Welland, Ontario. I went to visit Jeff at his office in Toronto, and this led to our first license agreement with Iona, later Phantom, for a dry powder carpet shampoo machine that we developed. It used Milliken's Capture moist powder product. You loaded dry powder, actually it's slightly damp powder, into the hopper on top of the cleaner head to deposit the powder. Not as easy as it sounds. We had to vibrate it to shake up the clumps and to spread it evenly. You then switch to the brush-in mode. Finally, you switch to pick-up or vacuum mode, all controlled mechanically from the top of the handle via a Bowden cable. Iona sold it to Sears. I had an interesting meeting with the Sears buyer, who would only buy it in all grey. I spent a day charming and cajoling her and managed to secure a bold dash of blue near the top. It worked well, and we sold some in the UK through a catalogue of new products run by a charming man called Clive Baharal. Our experience of dry shampoo, apart from John Wheeler's hair, is the reason that we sold a Dyson dry powder called Zorbitup and a stain remover called Dysolve alongside our vacuum cleaners. We went on to negotiate a license agreement with Iona for vacuum cleaners, and the deal was about to be signed when Amway launched a copy of my vacuum cleaner. Iona had heard about this copy even before it came out, as Amway had been to Sears, then the largest retailer in the USA, to try to sell it to them. When Iona went to Sears, they said they'd already seen the same product. I was stunned by this shocking news. Amway had not only cancelled the agreement, but it had now copied my technology. This was pretty exasperating, even more so because Iona negotiated my license deal downwards in the light of Amway's copy. We agreed to share costs to fight Amway through the courts. When you've developed a new technology or created a radically different product, have beaten the skeptics, established awareness, and battled to create a market for it, to discover a similar product from a company that had cancelled the license agreement is sickening, as though you have been punched in the solar plexus. You feel outraged by the personal theft and helpless. By now, 1987, Peter Gamak and Simeon Jupp had joined me in the coach house at home. They were both graduates in design engineering from the joint Royal College of Art Imperial College postgraduate degree course. I had made a point of keeping in touch with colleges and going to see their degree shows at the end of each academic year. It was a natural way for me to find innovative young design engineers. Pete had done a degree in engineering at Imperial College, followed by 2 years at the Royal College of Art to learn design. At his degree show, he exhibited an interesting slot machine to dispense newspapers. It was ingenious and cleverly executed. He hadn't chosen an obviously showy project, instead one that was unusual and well engineered. I liked that willingness not to be fashionable, but rather to do a thoughtful project. I was able to pay Pete and Simeon through royalties from Apex in Japan and through various consultancy fees. What was exciting is that, although our main focus was a vacuum cleaner, our thinking was that of a tech company. How else could we evolve cyclonic technology? What other uses could we put it to? In 1987, we reached a licensing deal so Iona could make and sell dual cyclone upright vacuum cleaners in both Canada and America under the name Phantom. I'm afraid that as things turned out, it was rather too prescient a name. I was also approached by Johnson Wax in the guise of a delightful Scott Johnson, no relation. They were interested in the industrial cleaning applications of our cyclonic system. I did a demonstration to a group of their top managers where I stamped on a glass of water, creating many shards as well as a puddle. I then vacuumed it all up with my cyclonic vacuum cleaner. Unlike a bag machine, it was unaffected by either water or glass. A senior executive, a most energetic Australian named Ross Cameron, leapt over a table to try the same demonstration himself. He had been an engineer with Austin Morris in Sydney, but became a champion within Johnson Wax, and we did a deal for them to sell in the industrial arena. Sadly, it didn't work out, as the chemical background vice president in charge failed to understand the vagaries of machinery, and they gave up. What came out of it was better still. I later offered Ross the task of starting and building Dyson in Australia, which he did magnificently. He is now retired, and we're the best of friends. Meanwhile, although I offered Phantom our latest designs and technology, they wanted to go their own way. As this turned out not to be very successful, I offered to buy them out. We were in the final throes of negotiating when they went bankrupt. A quirk in Canadian law is that, although under our legal agreement I'd only licensed them with the patents should have reverted to us. Instead, the receiver started to sell off our patents to the highest bidder. We bought the main ones back, but competitors outbid us for others. Although this was all most frustrating, it did give Dyson the golden opportunity to enter the North American market, then the biggest in the world, with our latest technology. Because Iona was licensed to make and sell our vacuum cleaners in Canada, but not the US, I had gone to see Conair, the big hairdryer company based in Stamford, Connecticut. Conair had been founded in 1959 in a garage in New York, and by now was very successful. The owner was Lee Rizzuto, son of Sicilian immigrants, and he seemed really nice, as did the company. We got close to the point of agreeing terms on a vacuum cleaner when they asked if they could look at the patents. In came the same unpleasant, pipe-sucking executive who had rubbished our patents at Black & Decker. I went to see Lee Rizzuto and said, if he is the person examining our patents, we're unlikely to do a deal. He thinks our patents are weak, but he is wrong. The pipe smoker killed the license anyway. At this point, in 1991, Vax came into the picture. A British company based in Droitwich, Worcestershire. It was founded in 1977 by Alan Brazier, a former rank Xerox salesman. Brazier had created his own shampooing and cleaning vacuum cleaner from a shower pump and milk churn after winning cleaning contracts from motorway service stations and finding existing cleaners unsatisfactory. For a short while, Vax was successful. Then they wanted to do an upright vacuum cleaner, and we designed one for them, but found them rather overbearing. They kept rejecting our designs until finally they said they would bring in other designers, so we walked away. Because they were delaying and not going into production, I cancelled the agreement. Now we had the threat of court action at home, while at the same time coping with the costs of the US lawsuit with Amway. Fortunately, we had our licensing agreement with Phantom, so we could just about keep our heads above water, although the end of each month, when salaries needed to be paid, was a worrying time. The lawsuit against Amway, like all US lawsuits, was long and arduous, 5 years in all, and a constant expense. There is a process whereby, in this situation, you can get an early injunction to stop an alleged infringer of your rights, but judges rarely give them if the damage can be recompensed by money. All very well if you have the millions to fight a 5-year lawsuit and subsequent appeals. We embarked on the lengthy lawsuit, taking on 2 very large US companies with huge resources, Amway and Bissell, in the USA. Amway had teamed up with Bissell to make its version of the vacuum cleaner. Bissell are based in the same city as Amway and had been a vacuum cleaner and carpet sweeper manufacturer for many years, known in the UK as Beck's Bissell. Since I'd explained the technology and know-how to Bissell during the license agreement with Amway, as well as handing over all the drawings, we had to sue Bissell for their part in the Amway version. Of course, I couldn't afford to fight on my own. The terms of my license agreement with Iona Phantom were drastically reduced, while they agreed to pay half the costs and take half the winnings, if any. Our litigator, Dick Baxter, also agreed to reduce fees, with him also taking a chunk of any winnings. This is what is called a partial contingency case. Then the real work started. We filed our claims in detail, and they filed their defence. Then both sides called for discovery. This allowed the other side to ask for every document and prototype imaginable, in order to see if there was a flaw in the case, and to work out how to attack and cross-examine witnesses, a long process. While we dredged back through all our paperwork and drawings and models, producing dozens and dozens of boxes of discovery documents, Amway produced hardly anything in response to our requests, which was less than credible. As the case progressed, and with legal bills mounting, it was clear that we had both a good infringement case and a good misappropriation of confidential information case. However, a classic defence on patent case is that the patent itself is invalid or the invention is obvious. Thus, throughout the case, I, as the patent holder, was defending the patent from attacks upon its validity. This is strange, because the time should be spent showing why the infringer has copied the patent. However, just because a patent is being granted, it may not mean that it's valid until tested in court. This is not very helpful, as the cost of filing and annual renewal fees to the Patent Office in each country is very high. In fact, I twice took cases before the European Court of Human Rights to have patent renewal fees declared illegal, on the basis that non-payment of the renewal fee, essentially a massive income to the government, results in the creator of the art losing their rights. This loss does not happen to any other creator of art. Twice the case was lost on the basis that the fees were reasonable, presumably according to the European patent offices. Yet when I was a penniless inventor, I was shelling out tens of thousands every year on renewal fees in just a few countries, which I struggled to pay on borrowed money, and so often had to surrender patents. As a part of US lawsuits, the opposing lawyers get to cross-examine the main witness, in the case of the Amway-Bissell dispute, me, from 9 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. day after day for 3 weeks. In Grand Rapids, I was faced across a large table by 5 lawyers from a big Chicago law firm acting for Amway and Bissell, asking question after question, with them passing post-it notes between them about how to trip me up. In a patent and misappropriation of confidential information case, words matter more than anything. Inventions are described in patents by words rather than drawings. Although drawings are included, the claims that are the substance of the patent are words. Words can be twisted, or the wrong synonym used, and under cross-examination, the use of the wrong word can cost you the case and the validity of your patent. I underwent 3 weeks of fraught cross-examination by aggressive lawyers, which I would not wish on anyone. Most unpleasant. The Amway CMS 1000 was quite clearly based on my drawings, patents, and confidential information. After 5 years of this bruising and bankrupting lawsuit, I was ready to pack it all in and settle the case. Deirdre, however, stood firm and told me that I mustn't give up. This was well judged. Shortly after my conversation with Deirdre, I was boarding a flight from Heathrow to Detroit for yet more cross-examination when I decided to call Dick Baxter, our charming litigator, in Grand Rapids. Dreading the flight and more cross-examination, I was elated by the news he gave me. Amway have indicated that they're willing to settle. I didn't need to fly, I could go home. Dick Baxter and Phantom, my licensee, shared the settlement with me. My share amounted to about $1 million. More importantly than this, I could regain my life. The black cloud that had hung over our family life for all too many years was lifted. We weren't rich. In fact, the award didn't even cover my share of the legal costs, but at least the costs had stopped. Instead of worrying whether or not we were going to be bankrupt, we could now think differently. We were more in control of our future. I wouldn't have to spend so much time dealing with the case, reading documents, and making trips to the US to see lawyers. Despite all that we'd been through and the settling of our case against the Americans, we were all frustrated at how things were progressing. To date, the North American market had proved to be hard work, while the experience with VAX was upsetting too. Almost all of our license agreements had failed, and precious time had been wasted. Instead of relying on other companies to make our technology, why didn't we reverse the decision that Jeremy and I had made several years previously? We would take on those competitors, who were very content selling bags and their loss of suction. We would be free to determine our own future and our own development and designs. Instead of feeling dread about taking on the mountainous task of becoming a manufacturer, we felt liberated. At the time, the biggest selling type of vacuum cleaner in Britain was the wet and dry carpet shampoo machine. We knew that we could make a much better wet wash vacuum cleaner than Vax. I already knew a great company called Limpac, who had injection moulded the plastic bin for the ball bearer, and I'd kept in touch with their enterprising boss, David Williams. I went to Louth to meet the owner, Evan Cornish, whose son later sold me their excellent Lincolnshire farm. They were really interested in moulding the plastic parts and funding the tooling. We built a prototype and decided to test it alongside a Vax on the carpet upstairs in the coach house. The prototype proved to be pretty hard work. If it was such hard work, why were people buying them, we wondered. It was time to do a bit of market research. We went to the hardware shop in Lark Hall on the edge of Bath, which we knew well, and asked them if they knew a customer who might like to come down to the coach house to take part in a test. Pete, Simeon and I watched as this nice lady set to work with our wet and dry carpet shampooer. "What do you think?" we asked. "It's really hard work," she said. "You know, I wouldn't want to do that twice." We abandoned the whole venture on the basis of what this one kind woman said. We knew in our bones that we were barking up the wrong tree. The Vax and those type of carpet shampooers were all hard work. This was the moment we decided to go against market trends and to concentrate on an upright cyclonic vacuum cleaner that we would make ourselves. It would be a considerable advance on the one we had licensed to Iona, the Canadian firm. There would be no more struggling with other companies, their patents, executives, and lawyers. We were going to do it our way, alone, and independently. Chapter 6, DC01. Of course, it wasn't that easy going our own way. While in early 1992, we continued to work on what would eventually become the best-selling DC01 vacuum cleaner in the coach house, a lathe, mill and workbenches downstairs and desks with 3 computers in the hayloft. I went out to try to borrow the money we needed to set up manufacturing. Venture capitalists proved to be no help. I went to see Adrian Beecroft, Chief Investment Officer at Apax Partners. As well as Tie Rack and Sock Shop, they were funding Bob Payton, the colourful American restaurateur who had founded the Chicago Pizza Pie Factory in London and was now planning further fast food joints. These were businesses that promised a quick return on the capital, which is what venture capitalists were looking for. In for a few years and then out maybe. I was approaching these investors to raise capital, cash, in exchange for equity or shares in my company. With this capital, I would not be saddled with the enormous bank overdraft that had plagued the Ball-Bearer Company. When I showed Apax my prototype and told them my story, they weren't interested, because it was about making things. In any case, from their point of view, I was an engineer, a designer, rather than a proper businessman. Adrian Beecroft said, "Well, we might consider your application if you got someone from industry to run it." I said, "Can you tell me a domestic appliance business in Britain that is being successfully run?" Hotpoint? Hoover? That was it. Neither of these was at all successful. Existing manufacturers hadn't brought out anything new for decades. I couldn't possibly go down that route. Apax proved to be a dead end. Even if they had funded me, they seemed fixated on my not running my own business. Where else could I look? There were no government schemes at the time to help. As for other venture capitalists, 5 turned me down. There were no tax advantages for investing in startups. Meanwhile, the clearing banks had been receiving bad press for reclaiming people's homes during the then deep recession, which was why I had avoided them. Why, in the midst of a deep recession, would they lend to me, creating yet another house repossession problem? In desperation, and with no prospect of success, I went to the Corn Street branch of Lloyd's in Bristol. My overdraft had escalated, and the bank thought it sensible to upgrade me from Chipping Sodbury to their Bristol head office. To my great surprise, it sounded hopeful, but even then, this caused a battle of wills within the bank. Mike Page, a flying doctor from the bank, came to see us at the coach house. "What do you need the money for?" he asked. I told him that I wanted to make vacuum cleaners to compete with Hoover and Electrolux. "That's very interesting," he said. "I'll let you know." He came back a week later and said, "We'll lend you £400,000, but you've got to sign over your house." I went off to Bristol with Deirdre and a lawyer, and we signed a nasty grey form, making everything we had over to the bank in exchange for the money. It was taking the ultimate risk. With 3 young children, we could end up evicted from our home. It was heady and scary stuff, even more so when Mike Page upped the loan to £600,000. Deirdre and I discussed the awful risk we were taking. We stood to lose everything we had. It didn't bear thinking about, and we had no idea what we would do if we failed. However, it was our last chance to make our invention work, to show faith in what we had done. It was extraordinary that Deirdre went along with this last roll of the dice. Sometime later, when I dared to ask Mike Page why he had lent me the money, he said, "Well, you had fought a 5-year lawsuit in America, so I could see you had determination, and I went home to my wife and told her that you were doing a vacuum cleaner without a bag, and what did she think of that? And she thought it was brilliant not to have a bag." And that was that, although what we didn't know at the time was that Lloyd's had turned his request down. He had to appeal to the ombudsman in the bank's head office in Cardiff, who for some reason agreed with him. Sadly, it's not often that banks or bank managers receive praise for the risks they take. The great thing is that now we had our own money, well, the bank's money, and no need for investors, who I didn't want anyway. The tricky thing, though, is that we set up Dyson Appliances Limited just as the recession hit. The British economy was pretty rocky for the next 2 years. There were riots over hardship in Bristol and Cardiff, as well as in Birmingham, Tyneside and other parts of the country. The recession had been caused not least by high interest rates used by the government as a means of controlling inflation. This, though, led to high mortgage rates and falling house prices, at the same time as the pound was overvalued to maintain British membership of the EEC European Monetary System, making British exports uncompetitive on price. This unhealthy recipe saw unemployment rise to 10% in 1992. When Britain left what was now the EEC exchange rate mechanism, that September, the pound was devalued by 20% and the economy began to recover. We moved very quickly to get the vacuum cleaner into production. Peter Gamek concentrated on tooling, and we signed up a £750,000 deal with various tool makers in northeast Italy that I knew from the Sanusi days. This was all the money I had, having used up the loan from the bank and the money from the Amway settlement. I had no money for a factory or to buy components, and no money to do any marketing. Meanwhile, I looked for a factory. The Welsh Development Agency was giving grants at the time to manufacturers looking for new factories and new business. The agency itself was a good organisation, but to get approval for a grant, you had to apply through one of 4 consultancy firms, who would then put your proposal to the Secretary of State for Wales. This was David Hunt, now Lord Hunt. We had spent £28,000 with PricewaterhouseCoopers in this process, only to be told by David Hunt that we were undercapitalised. Our case was rejected, although we could apply again if we were able to raise more money. We were in fact better capitalised than a firm of Japanese zip makers that got a grant at this time. Our problem, I discovered, is that unlike the Japanese zip maker, we were not foreign investors, and so no feather in the cap for David Hunt. Funnily enough, soon afterwards, I went to see Phillips Plastics, an American firm based in Wrexham in North Wales, to see if they might make plastic components for the vacuum cleaner. Their new factory had been built with the help of a grant from the Welsh Development Agency and approved by David Hunt. It had very little work. I suggested, as they'd been making the plastic components, perhaps we could assemble a vacuum cleaner inside the half of the building they weren't using. Philip said, yes, that's fine. So we had the tools shipped there from Italy, along with components from various sources: a hose and brush bar from the Accrington Brush Company, a motor from a Japanese manufacturer, and brush bristles from Changqing in China. We employed people for assembly work locally in Wrexham. The first production-quality vacuum cleaner to bear the Dyson name started rolling off the production line in January 1993. We had already shown Gus, Great Universal Stores, and Littlewoods, 2 retail giants, a working model, and published in their January 1993 catalogues, we were able to supply them in the 3rd week of the month. It might be hard now to recognise what big deals these were for us. Gus, Littlewood's Manchester rival, was owned and run by Isaac Wolfson, chairman from 1932 to 1987, who created the Wolfson Foundation and built colleges in both Oxford and Cambridge. I drove up to their HQ in Manchester to visit their buyer, Brian Lamont, to show him the Dyson prototype, explaining that no loss of suction with no need to buy bags, and then mentioned that we supplied the machine with our dry powder carpet shampoo called Zorbitup, as a much better alternative to soaking the carpet. Zorbitup was a direct result of John Whelan's hair-cleaning habit. I was intrigued when he told me at college that he shampooed his hair with dry powder. I had visions of the flea powder we used on our dog. After we had rejected our wet carpet shampoo machine in favour of an upright vacuum cleaner, I'd been thinking of a better way to shampoo carpets. John's dry shampoo seemed to be the answer. It could be used with our upright vacuum cleaner, its rotating brush embedding the shampoo into carpets. Brian Lamont was very sceptical, convinced that our machine would fail to clean up the popular blackcurrant drink, Ribena. I rushed out to the nearest petrol station to buy a bottle. Back in his office, I spilled some of the deep crimson juice on his fine carpet, applied the dry powder, and removed the stain. He then asked me why he should remove a well-known brand such as Electrolux or Hoover from his pages to put in this unknown Dyson with frightening talk of cyclones and 200-mile-an-hour centrifugal speeds. My response, that his catalogue was boring, met with silence for a while, until he finally agreed to buy from us. By the 1980s, Littlewoods, famous for football pools as well as its retail catalogues, was both the largest family-owned company in Britain and Europe's biggest private company. Its headquarters were the monolithic Art Deco building designed by Gerard de Courcy Fraser, opened in 1938, given over to wartime production the following year. Because Gus was buying from us, they also agreed terms. All that we had achieved had been accomplished in what I suppose should be described as record time. It was a bit makeshift, though, in that there was a production line in half a factory at Wrexham, and HQ was the coach house where we engineers worked alongside with Bob Webwell, in charge of accounts, purchasing and logistics, 2 salespeople and a PA. We serviced our first vacuum cleaners in the coach house. 3 months later, in April 1993, Philips, who had no other work, decided to double the price of the plastic parts. I said that if they did, I'd take the assembly of the vacuum cleaner elsewhere. If you do that, they said, we'll triple the price. Within a fortnight, I'd rented a former post office depot in Chippenham, and we were up and running very quickly. Deirdre, for one, was pleased. If the family business was finally leaving home, it meant that the coach house was free for her to use as an art gallery to display and sell her works, while the driveway to the house was no longer full of cars. Even so, moving from Wrexham to Chippenham wasn't quite as easy as it sounds. Aside from the sheer rush, I had to get a court order to remove our tooling from Philips, and when we did get it back, we found there was quite a lot of damage to rectify. In spite of their David Hunt grant, Philips quit the UK. And of course, I had to find a plastic moulding company, there and then. I found one, Chowdhury, in Birmingham. Our makeshift factory was not exactly ideal. The building had 29 roller shutter doors and was icy cold in winter. When we needed more space, we bought a huge second-hand tent the size of a car park. Local cab drivers called it the Madonna tent because of its twin peaks. On cold days, it sweated inside. Hired containers provided further space. This was a big and uncertain moment for me, and yet, in July, we began production with the DA001, and soon afterwards, the improved DC01. Within 18 months, this was the biggest seller in the UK market. Our first sales were through hefty mail order catalogues. These devoted a few pages to vacuum cleaners. We were among the last pages, at the bottom, with a small square picture of the DC01. There was no room for descriptive copy, just the tag, no bag, and the opportunity to pay £1.99 a month instead of £199 outright. Ours was the most expensive cleaner in these catalogues by some margin, and they were not the sort of place you would expect expensive items to be sold. Both we and the buyers at the catalogue were in fact astonished the DC01 did so well through their pages, with repeat orders coming in. I have never, though, believed that someone's income is a barter than wanting to buy the best product, and a vacuum cleaner is an important purchase. They may have to save or borrow or sign a hire purchase agreement, as people did then. They will go for the best if they can. This initial success led to the DC01 being taken up by our first retailer. This was Rumbelows, a national chain of shops selling electrical goods. John Lewis, an excellent department store with 25 branches, followed, although they insisted on a trial. This was successful, although some of their branches refused to stock it. Now, though, we were selling quite well across a good spectrum of sales outlets, and I knew we would survive. Deirdre and I could relax a bit. I knew I had various degrees of perseverance, determination, grit, and what you might call bloody-mindedness. Yet these qualities, I like to think they are qualities, were underpinned by a kind of naive intelligence, by which I mean following your own star along a path where you stop to question both yourself and expert opinion along the way. A willingness to keep questioning the validity of an idea, or indeed a product, might sound naive in a world of slick global business. But I can say it worked for me and Dyson, as I think it can and will for inventors, engineers and designers and makers of the future. I had been warned, for example, that at £200, or at least 3 times as expensive as most other vacuum cleaners, the DC-01 would prove to be too expensive. It sold really well. The sheer cost of producing it, and as a result the high price tag, was mitigated by the fact that those choosing it recognise its technological advantage over existing designs. I was also told that no one would want to see dust sucked up by a cleaner inside a transparent container. Simple market research confirmed this. However, Pete, Simeon and I enjoyed seeing the dirt we had extracted in all its gory detail, so we ignored the market research. Curiously, and aside from the fact that the new cleaner was clearly powerful and with constant suction, this is exactly what consumers did like to see. They were fascinated by the sight of just how much dirt they had successfully cleaned up. They clearly liked our venture into television advertising too. Dyson, no bag, no loss of suction. It was all a bit odd at the time because we were promoting what we didn't have, a bag, when traditionally advertising spoke only in positives. This negative approach was a result of spending a week with the brilliant Tony Marenka, a freelance creative who worked with us. Instead of talking about the clever cyclones, about no need to buy bags, about the quick-draw hose, the powerful suction, we decided to highlight the Achilles heel of other vacuum cleaners, the bag and its shortcomings. It worked, except for one small problem. It became known as the bagless vacuum cleaner. This term was coined by our competitors, not by us. I think they came up with it to point out to retailers that if they tried to sell a Dyson, they would in turn lose sales of replacement bags, to put them off selling Dysons. However, we would rather a Dyson be known as the no loss of suction vacuum cleaner, which is a much more important performance feature than the absence of a bag. 15 years of invention, frustration and determination were, however, beginning to pay off. I was now a proper manufacturer, thrilling to the sight and sound of a production line in full swing. I found it impressive, staggering even. I still do. I worked on the line for 2 weeks to understand how to make the vacuum cleaner more efficiently, and I've watched all of our lines ever since. I was able to alter how we assemble vacuum cleaners along the line by moving some sub-assemblies off the line, making it move faster. I learned which components were difficult to assemble and encouraged our engineers to visit lines frequently. Most importantly, this experience helped me to look at all our subsequent products to understand where production inefficiencies lie. One of the great challenges at the time in Britain, however, had been to win over the wholesale and retail business beyond Gus and Littlewood's catalogues and John Lewis, and to get these to thoroughly endorse DC-01. How best could I share my enthusiasm for what I knew was a great and innovative product? Some of the obstacles lying in our path were quite frustrating. I dropped into the Chippenham branch of Rumbelows. They had a lineup of gleaming new vacuum cleaners, but the DC-01 on display was full of black dust. It looked disgusting. I asked a sales assistant why it was so dirty. "Oh," she said, "it's because we clean the shop with it. It's the best of the vacuum cleaners." So I asked, "Which vacuum cleaner do you recommend to customers?" "Oh, Panasonic." "Why?" "Because I've got one at home." Among key retailers for vacuum cleaner at the time were local electricity board showrooms. These disappeared eventually, following on from the privatisation of the British power industry. But they used to be on many high streets, and this is where people came to pay their electricity bills, so they had lots of customers. We went to see the Eastern Electricity Board, where their buyer had been testing one of the vacuum cleaners for a fortnight. He told us, "It's a really good vacuum cleaner, I like it, It works really well, but I'm not going to take it because you can't afford to advertise on television. I did a quick mental calculation and said, if you buy 2,000, I'll spend £40,000 on telly. So for every 1,000 machines you buy, I'll spend £20,000 with Anglia Television. He said, deal. And we sold a lot of vacuum cleaners in East Anglia. While it was great to discover how well it was received, and especially by those who choose to use it in preference to existing vacuum cleaners, it was almost impossible to know why some retailers would take it while others wouldn't. Sometimes our dealings with retailers bordered on the bizarre. We started to sell really well in Scotland through Scottish Power and Scottish Hydro showrooms. One day, we went into a Scottish Power stall in Edinburgh to find out how our cleaners were sold face to face. A young woman dressed in a Scottish Power uniform did her best to sell us a Hoover. I asked her, why a Hoover? Well, it's the best vacuum cleaner. I asked her, in a nice way of course, if she was really from Scottish Power. No, she replied, I'm from Hoover. It was all a bit disconcerting and certainly misleading to consumers. We got on really well with John Lewis, a company that truly liked innovative design. But sales of DC01s in one branch could be very much higher or lower than in other branches around the country. Friends had gone into the Bristol branch, told me they were telling people not to buy a Dyson, but to buy a Sebo vacuum cleaner from Germany instead. This is known in the retail trade as switch selling. What I heard is that Sebo was only sold through John Lewis. Their importers went around John Lewis branches, training staff on the virtue of Sebo products. Was it true? I drove to Bristol and pretended to be a customer. Oh no, I was told, you don't want a Dyson, it breaks. What you want is this well-made Sebo vacuum cleaner from Germany, which is made of better plastic. I said, well, I'm Mr. Dyson actually, and by the way, the Dyson's made of ABS, a tough and expensive thermoplastic polymer, and costly polycarbonate, while the Sebo is made of cheap polypropylene used for washing up bowls. I was told that I must make a proper appointment to come and talk to the staff, all of whom, of course, were partners of John Lewis. 2 weeks later, I was back in Bristol again. I explained that we use this very expensive material, polycarbonate, that is 4 times the price and 4 times as strong as polypropylene. You can hit a Dyson with a hammer and it won't break. One of the partners said, I don't believe you. I suggested she go and get a hammer and try for herself, and she did just that. Hit it as hard as you like, I said. She walloped the cleaner's bin and the hammer bounced off, as I knew it would. Now hit the Sebo. She did, and the thing shattered. She certainly made an impression. Bristol became one of our best-selling John Lewis branches. This, though, wasn't the end of the Sebo story. Within 18 months of setting up production in Chippenham, we had 20% of the UK vacuum cleaner market. Deirdre and I bought a house in Chelsea. One Saturday morning, we were in Peter Jones, John Lewis' flagship store in Sloane Square. Deirdre was buying kitchen appliances, while I couldn't help wandering over to the section where they sold vacuum cleaners. A young chap came up to me, and I asked him what he thought of the Dyson. Should I get one? No, he said. We get lots of returns of the Dyson. What you want is a Sebo. I got in touch with the buyer and asked to see the returns figures. What the floor walker had told me was completely untrue. Funnily enough, Terence Conran had been in Peter Jones around the same time. He said he was interested in buying a Dyson and got the same treatment. He told the sales staff, well, if you're not going to sell it, I will. I didn't know Terence personally then, but he got in touch immediately afterwards and said, we'd like to sell the Dyson in the Conran shop. That was exciting because I had tremendous respect for Terence, and the Conran shop sold some of the very best modern design you could buy. Unbeknown to him, I had spent the summer of 1967 working in the Conran Design Group as a student placement, designing chairs for Heathrow Airport. Following this, we became good friends, with me chairing his design museum and having a joint furniture company. We did, though, build a very good relationship with John Lewis. One of the things I learned was that we needed to talk to its partners, to explain why and how we were offering something different from existing vacuum cleaners. I gave talks to partners at their headquarters and at their country house hotel and conference centre at Odney in Berkshire. The SIBO story aside, John Lewis understood good design and knew what their customers would buy. But it took nearly 2 years to get our vacuum cleaners into mass-market Comet, Argos and Currys warehouses. For a long while, their buyers wouldn't speak to us, wouldn't answer the phone. We needed a break, and we got it when our wonderful local Wiltshire MP, Richard Needham, turned up out of the blue at the Chippenham factory. He happened to be the very energetic Minister of State for Trade in John Major's government. I started to tell the minister all the things that were wrong about politics when he suddenly said, "Shut the fuck up, Dyson. What's your turnover?" Refreshing for an old Etonian and government minister. "About 3.5 million, I said. "I wanted up to 50 million within 12 months. What help do you need?" I explained the problems we were having with the mass-market retail trade. Needham arranged for Geoffrey Howe, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer and Deputy Prime Minister, to come and visit. It all seemed rather odd, not least because Howe spoke so quietly you had to lean in very close to hear what he was saying. He seemed very interested to know that I couldn't speak to buyers at Currys, Argos and Comet. "Oh," he whispered, "Elspeth's on the board of Comet." Elspeth Howe was, I think, chairperson of the Broadcasting Standards Commission at the time. She is also the daughter of Philip Morton Shand, the architectural writer who did much to introduce the work of Walter Gropius and Le Corbusier, both of whom he knew well, to England. He also had a company that was the first to import bentwood furniture by the revered Finnish architect Alvar Aalto. The next morning, I got a call from Comet. They would like to sell our vacuum cleaners. Currys and Argos followed. From the perspective of the 2020s, it might seem odd that, John Lewis, Peter Jones and the Conran shop aside, we built up our sales through these mass-market retailers. Aside from the fact that we needed them, they were the major British outlets for electrical goods, their customers wanted a vacuum cleaner that worked really well, and without the need for replacement bags, of course, and they weren't put off by the price. Yes, you could buy a vacuum cleaner for £40, and the Dyson was a stretch at £199. But we were selling to people who were truly house-proud. They wanted the best. There is an assumption that Dyson products are purely for middle-class buyers. It simply isn't true. Cod psychology might say that interest in vacuum cleaners is in inverse proportion to one's wealth. Our products might be expensive, but that's due to the research and development that goes into them, how they're made, and how they perform. It was the last of these qualities, in fact, that took us a very long time indeed to get across in shops and retail warehouses. For many years, products were distinguished, looks aside, by price alone. Over several years, I tried to persuade John Lewis, Currys and Comet to let us say something about why people should spend £199 on our vacuum cleaner rather than £40 on another in the same display. The breakthrough was with Comet, who allowed us to explain what our vacuum cleaners did on stickers on the clear bin. I wanted to explain, even in just a very few words and figures, the distinct advantages of our new technology and how our vacuum cleaners, proven by standards tests, perform much better. Before Christmas in our first year in Currys, Mark Suhami, one of the bosses alongside the founder Stanley Calms, invited me for lunch with them both. They explained that because of Dyson, they were now making a profit in their vacuum cleaner section, and he wanted more Dyson products. Why didn't we do different colours and different features to make a range? Henry Ford had previously been my guide, and as early Fords came early in black, early Dysons were strictly silver and yellow. It was sage advice for which I was grateful and immediately followed. By 1995, 2 years after our launch, Dyson was turning a good profit and expanding rapidly. We had paid off the enormous bank loan and were able to tear up the grey bank guarantee forms. Deirdre and I were enormously relieved. We could keep our home and pay off the mortgage. And our long-standing overdraft was finally a thing of the past. At the same time, we knew that we were caught up in the most exciting adventure of our lives, We desperately needed a new factory, and wouldn't it be great if we could build one that reflected our thinking and values? I got in touch with Tony Hunt, my Royal College of Art tutor for structural engineering, himself an inventive and successful structural engineer, who by now had worked with Norman Foster, Richard Rogers, Nicholas Grimshaw, and Michael and Patty Hopkins, Britain's pioneering high-tech architects whose work fused engineering and architecture in seamless fashion. Tony recommended 3 architects to design the new Dyson factory. Chris Wilkinson, who before setting up his own practice in 1983 and had, like Tony, worked for Foster, Rogers and Hopkins, impressed me. Instead of telling me what he thought I needed, he asked lots of questions that helped me to think what we really needed and wanted, and drew sketches for me in response to my answers. This is, of course, exactly what Jeremy Fry had taught me to do when selling the C-Truck. Ask your client what they think they want and then suggest solutions. But because the planning process would take too long, we needed a new building there and then. We looked instead for an existing factory in the area. I found a site on Tetbury Hill, on the edge of Malmesbury in Wiltshire, 10 miles north of Chippenham. I was able to buy it outright through income from DC01. The previous occupant was Linerlite, a company founded by Alfred Bootle, who in 1901, when he was 21, had patented a double-ended incandescent lamp. Before the triumph of the fluorescent light, strips of double-ended incandescent lamps lit factories the length and breadth of Britain and around the world. These were also used for concealed lighting in Art Deco clubs, hotels, and in the interiors of graceful pre-war ocean liners. Malmesbury, on the face of it, a deeply rural market town serving farmers first and foremost, had also been a hub of inventive manufacturing with a global reach. This was especially true during the Second World War, when Linerlite equipped the RAF and the British Army with patented clips used in the fuel lines and cooling systems of aircrafts and tanks, and in de-icing equipment first fitted to the Fairey battle bomber in 1937. Rather intriguingly, the first recorded British aeronaut was Aylmer, a monk of Malmesbury Abbey. In around 1010, Aylmer leapt from the Abbey's tower and flew across the valley for a few seconds before, presumably, his wings collapsed and he fell to the ground, breaking both legs. He wanted to try again, as inventors must, but was grounded by his abbot. Happily, Aylmer lived to a ripe old age. Later on, Malmesbury became well known for its cloth trade and silk mills, while again, during the Second World War, it was home to Echo, a radio manufacturer that worked on radar. Even though our first factory here was old-fashioned, Malmesbury seemed like the right place to be, and after Chippenham, our new accommodation, all 80,000 square feet of it, seemed palatial. Within what seemed little more than 5 minutes, though, we had filled the old Linerlite factory to its gunnels. The DC01 had become a commercial success. Luckily, I was able to buy land next door from Lord Morton, with outline planning permission, and in 1996 invited Chris Wilkinson and Tony Hunt to develop our first purpose-built Dyson building. Chris did a wonderful job. Viewed close up, the gentle waves of its long roof are a romantic nod to traditional sawtooth or zigzag skylines of traditional factories. The roof profile also helps in the collection and removal of rainwater. Because this flows relatively slowly down the roof's arches, it needs only small diameter pipes, and as a bonus, these suck the water away. Chris believes architecture should be a fusion of art, science and nature, something I felt he achieved for us on Tetbury Hill, both in the way the building looks and in the ways it works. He also stuck resolutely to our budget. We've worked together closely ever since. I wanted the building, a cluster of buildings in fact, to be an inspiring place to work in, and indeed a youthful marriage of architecture, art, design and technology. The reception area, a glass cube joining 2 buildings, is entered over a glass bridge across a pond filled with an installation of fibre optic reeds designed by Diana Wilkinson, Chris's wife and a talented sculptress. For the courtyard between the two buildings, fronted by the glass cube, I sourced copper figures by Peter Burke, a former Rolls-Royce aero-engine apprentice engineer before he turned to sculpture. These comprise 40 life-size men and women made from old copper hot water tanks that had succumbed to corrosion. Peter flattened these by driving over them with a JCB, and then vacuum formed them into figures at Doughty Aerospace. My hope is that they will eventually go green as the copper oxidized. I like the idea of Peter's figures animating a space like students in the quadrangles of Cambridge colleges. Frank Whittle, my hero, had read engineering at Cambridge while serving with the RAF. He went on, of course, to collaborate with Rolls-Royce aero engines, who manufacture the Welland jet engine on display inside the Malmesbury factory. At this time, we were recruiting a lot of engineering graduates, especially for research and development. Increasingly, I felt the factory should be like a university campus, although one where products were designed, prototyped, tested and made. And this is indeed what it came to resemble when we further extended it, and especially when more recently we added a village for Dyson undergraduates, along with a sports centre and cafes. The extra land came again from Lord Morton, himself a self-made entrepreneur, and for whom we have planted a fine Turkey oak by which to remember him. I wanted ours to be a healthy place to work. When at first the M&E, mechanical and electrical, contractors proposed a conventional air conditioning system whereby you recirculate 80% of the air and only let in 20% fresh air, I said I didn't want any recirculated air, as this causes illnesses and sick building syndrome. Just the 20% fresh air, please. The mathematics baffled me. What was the point of recirculating 80% of the air? Apart from the massive ductwork and fans necessary, how did the 80% circulation benefit the air in the building? I could only imagine recirculated bad air. The expert view was that I couldn't have what I thought was right. This led to a 2-week standoff with the mechanical and electrical consultants. Eventually they complied, and the building is much simpler and healthier as a result. Fresh, clean Wiltshire air is fed up from the floor and exits through air outlets in the roof. There are chiller beams under the ceiling, as cold air falls, with underfloor radiators concealed around the perimeter. With no unsightly ducts gathering dust, the system is very simple but highly effective and uses less power. I've always loathed companies that use greenwash as part of their marketing. I would rather reduce our environmental impact quietly and by action. We were, and remain, a company primarily of engineers, and because of this, we have sought from the outset to use as little energy or materials as possible to solve or complete any one particular task. Lean engineering is good engineering. This is something, in fact, engineers I admire have done since the advent of powered machinery. When in 2010 I took part in Channel 4's TV series Genius of Britain, I was able to show how, by rethinking Newcomen's slow and inefficient steam engine, dating from 1712, and used mostly for pumping water from mines, James Watt was able to increase its efficiency 5-fold. The same was true for us at Dyson. From DC-01 onwards, our first-generation vacuum cleaners used a proprietary Japanese 1400-watt electric motor, while our competitors boasted of 2,000 and even 2,400-watt motors. However, we had no loss of suction, and therefore we wasted none of our power, whereas the competitors lost suction and indeed wasted so much of their power through their clogged bags. For me, as for all Dyson engineers, lightness, lean engineering and material efficiency is a guiding principle. Using less material means using less energy in the process of making things. It also means lighter products that need less energy to power them, and they're easier to handle and so more pleasurable to use. What I learned right away from making the sea truck was that the weight of the boat was critical to its ability to get up on the plane and speed over water at up to 45 miles an hour. Lean engineering was, perhaps, built into me right from the beginning. Long-distance runners need to be lean too, of course. and I think it is built into most engineers. It's in our genes. At Malmesbury, we began reducing the weight of the vacuum cleaner from the word go. We thought it was ridiculous, for example, that plastic mouldings need to be as thick as they were. The thicker the plastic, the more you need of it. The more you need of it, the more electricity you need to melt and mould it. So we had a standoff with our plastic material suppliers, who insisted we needed mouldings 2.5 to 3.5 millimetres thick in order to push the plastic through the cavity of the mould. This is what their mould-filling computer programs predicted. We designed and made one of our clear bins with a 1 millimetre thick wall. Lo and behold, unlike the plastic supplier's computer program, it worked. We were tripling production of vacuum cleaners every year from 1993, so this seemingly simple move saved a considerable amount of material and energy. At the same time, of course, we had to ensure that our machines remained durable over a long period. We set up a large-scale torture course to test our vacuum cleaners to well beyond what could possibly be expected of them, even in the roughest, toughest household. Although these consist of many mechanical test rigs, we also have hundreds of people brutally using our products in test courses, doing their best to break them or wear them out. Every 200 actions, photos are taken and notes recorded. This controlled rigour allows us to use fewer materials and make lighter products. We had refined the workings of the vacuum cleaner from the word go at Malmesbury too. Each model was different from its predecessor, always advancing the technology. As Buckminster Fuller said, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." Bucky wasn't thinking of change as in the built-in obsolescence of American cars of the 50s and 60s, but of revolutions in design. We were, in fact, to make our early vacuum cleaners redundant, although old models kept and will keep working, as we research and develop new technologies and materials. This is only slightly jumping the gun, as the radical technological changes we've been able to make in the past 2 decades were possible because Malmesbury, Malaysia and the Philippines and Singapore developed apace as R&D-based manufacturing campuses. This is also why we were able to recruit engineering graduates, who may well have wondered why they might consider joining Dyson when our campus was in rural Wiltshire, the best part of 100 miles from London, and we made seemingly prosaic things. Why work on the design and development of a vacuum cleaner when you could be working on an aero engine or the latest computer? I love the fact that we tackled prosaic products, making the vacuum cleaner into a high-performing machine. As we did, we developed Dyson into a tech company driven by the very graduate engineers we took on. I say we more often in this chapter than I, because we quickly built up into a team, and what we began to think of as campuses of brilliant young engineers who understood that their job was to think freely, ask questions, and to challenge what we did to find better design, technology, and products. The atmosphere morphed suddenly from a factory at Malmesbury to a research and development centre was and remains attractive to young people. So too are our research campuses in Malaysia and the Philippines, and our new St James's Power Station campus in Singapore. At Malmesbury, we might, in London and New York and Singapore terms, be miles from anywhere, yet the campus has special attractions. With Chris Wilkinson again as architect, we were to add the hangar, a multi-purpose sports building, and the Lightning Cafe, where everyone can meet. Here you can sit on Fritz and Hansen chairs around tables with an English Electric F1A Lightning Mach 2 RAF interceptor hanging from the ceiling by just 3 wire cables. The Lightning, a sensationally fast and supremely purposeful aircraft, was restored over 18 months. It's one of several machines that continue to inspire me dotted around the campus, including the aforementioned 1961 Mini, a Harrier jump jet, a sea truck, 45 years old and brought back from a harbour authority in Wales, and a Bell 47 helicopter. The stories and people behind these machines show what's possible when engineers think big, unconstrained by the current state of the art. They can really change the world. Our machines are not museum artifacts. They're here to be touched and understood, in terms of the ideas behind them, the engineering that made them possible, and the frustration and failure that went into them along the way. The damselfly-like Bell 47 was designed by the US inventor and philosopher Arthur M. Young, who spent 12 solitary years as a young man in a workshop, converted from stables in his father's Pennsylvania farm between 1928 and 1940, developing working-scale models of what was to become the world's first commercially available helicopter. Our D9 research building, designed by Chris Wilkinson and opened in 2016, gave us the space and facilities to dig deeper into the research of future technologies and products. For a scientist or engineer, it's an attractive place to be. Its 2 vast floors centred on an atrium and its centrally located labs are hidden behind the building's wrapped around reflective glass walls. The glass walls are 5 by 3 metre prefabricated blocks glass panels, which, for the first time in a building, form the periphery building structure. They are reflective partly because, increasingly, we need top-secret laboratories, but also to reflect in the glass the trees that surround the building. I can never say in public what we're up to here at any given moment, because the investment in our research has grown apace as Dyson has moved on, and we need to keep a very tight control of our work for future products. The D9 Research Centre, though, is a great place to work. We've tested new ideas using the very fabric of the building, like the Q-beam duo lights developed by Jake. Suspended from ceilings like satellites, these provide individually adjustable task and ambient light. They're LED lamps cooled using heat pipe technology found in satellites, and microprocessor technology found in satellites and microprocessor technology, and they had a life of 180,000 hours. We've aimed at making the campus a place of both invention and creative play, with what we research and make reflected in the design of the buildings. When you look down from the top of the stair in the Lightning Cafe, the spiral form coming up to meet you is a visual reference to the turbines in our electric motors. This is clearly our campus, with a character of its own. From the beginning, we decided we would create our own publicity materials and advertising. We would not use outside agencies. This is because we want to talk fearlessly about technology, which of course is what had driven Dyson into being. Since we have developed the technology, we should know how to explain it to others. In the late 90s, a Belgian court banned us from talking about vacuum cleaner bags. I didn't realise they could do this, and I would have thought it was illegal. But Belgium had tight comparative advertising laws, and our European competitors ganged up together to sue us, arguing that we shouldn't say that we didn't have a bag, as this gave Dyson a comparative advantage. While this seems absurd, the court found us guilty. We produced an ad shot by the photographer Don McCullen with the words "bagless" blanked out repeatedly, and a strapline that read, "Sorry, but the Belgian court won't let you know what everyone has a right to know." This got the media interested. We were able to tell them a story of how European manufacturers, as a group, were trying to silence competition. One of the ways we made Dyson distinctive is by not allowing ourselves to rest on our laurels, not for a moment. With the upright DC-01 selling well, in 1995 we launched DC-02, a compact dual-cyclone vacuum cleaner that solved a problem known to every household, not just in Britain, but around the world. It sat securely on stairs. This was our first cylinder model. Peter Gamak and the other engineers were fully occupied with DC-01, so I designed it with Andrew Thompson, who had just joined Dyson straight from the Imperial College via the Royal College of Art engineering course. The clear bin and cyclones were at 45 degrees, with the long handle on top and the motor and wheels underneath them. It departed from the blob or cylinder shape of our competitors. I was interested that while nobody has ever commented on the design of the DC-01, they have on the DC-02. We made it available in a number of colours and special editions, including De Stijl, our homage to the early 20th century Dutch design movement that, well, to my mind, was the true foundation of modern design, some 10 years before the Bauhaus. In fact, we made quite a number of special editions of different cleaners, whether to raise the profile of particular causes, like the green DC-02 Recyclone, made of green recycled plastic, or to raise money and awareness for charities. In 1994, we issued the silver and light blue DC-01 Antarctic Solo, signed by Ranulph Fiennes, the explorer, the first person to walk without support across Antarctica. We funded the trip to raise money for breakthrough breast cancer. Both my parents having died of cancer, I was anxious to help find a cure. Surprisingly at that time, very little fundraising was going to breast cancer research. I decided to use Sir Ranulph's trip as an awareness-raising exercise. Fiennes had approached me because his wife sent him off one weekend to buy a vacuum cleaner. He chose a Dyson and had an inkling we might see eye to eye. We did. We also designed a special compass for his expedition. This was a fecund as well as a highly productive period. By 1995, we began to think of altogether new products. One of these was a Dyson Contra-Rotator, a washing machine. It proved to be a really good washing machine, as it happened. This is not just me talking, but it never made money. The problem was that it was expensive to make, and the price we sold it at when it was finally launched in 2000, although high at £1,099, was too low for it to make a profit. We started trying to reduce the cost of production, rather unsuccessfully. The marketing team, who I listened to, said to me, "If you make it £200 cheaper, you will sell a lot more." And I believed them. We made it £200 cheaper and sold exactly the same number at £899 as we had at £1,099, and ended up losing even more money. I had made a classic mistake. This may sound counterintuitive, but I should have increased the price. The Contra-Rotator was not meant to be a low-cost washing machine. It was a different and well-engineered product made for those who would appreciate it and be willing to pay that bit extra for it. We stopped making it in 2002, and I was sorry to do so, not least because it was a way of rethinking the way washing machines work. We serviced Contra-Rotators for the next 15 years. Mine are still running. Traditional washing machines have a single drum that rotates in one direction at a time, taking a sopping wet and heavy wad of clothes with it. With so little actual washing action, the clothes needed an extended soak in detergent to get clean. Our research showed, contrary to popular perception, that hand washing was more effective at cleaning clothes than using a washing machine. In fact, we found that a washing machine running for 2 hours was no better at cleaning clothes than washing them by hand for 15 minutes. The Dyson Contra-Rotator was the first washing machine with a pair of drums that rotated in opposite directions to replicate the movement of hand washing. The result was cleaner clothes faster, with a bigger load and using less water. The Contra-Rotator operated at 30 to 40 degrees rather than the usual 50 to 60 degrees to prevent shrinkage. It was, though, a bit more complicated than standard washing machines. It needed 2 motors, one for each drum. Because both drums had to spin on the drying cycle at high speed in the same direction, the Contra-Rotator also needed a clutch and gearbox. And so round we go to the question of manufacturing cost and selling price. One other product we let go of at Malmesbury was a pet project of mine, developed over many years. This was the diesel trap, or cyclonic exhaust filter, a hangover from the coach house days. I'd read a great deal about the dangers of diesel exhaust, particulates exhausted, are carcinogenic, and I couldn't square what the EU and British government were saying about the cleanliness of diesel exhaust with serious medical research. It did seem pretty obvious to anyone driving in the slipstream of another vehicle, drawing in their exhaust fumes. You can smell them, and you are breathing them in. And if you took the train from London to get to us, you experienced the dirty qualities of diesel train exhaust. Diesel engines left running for lengthy spells under Brunel's great glazed roof at Paddington Station pumped out all too visible and dangerous exhaust fumes. The government, though, cut duty on diesel to promote it, following the lobbying of car makers, EU diktats, and consultation with one of its key advisors, Sir David King, the chief scientific advisor at the time. He later admitted that the government's view on diesel had been wrong. At the coach house, we developed a cyclone for catching diesel exhaust pollution. I got to demonstrate this in a 1993 edition of BBC TV's Blue Peter. For this, I drove around Shepherd's Bush in West London in a diesel-powered Ford Transit and showed Blue Peter's Anthea Turner the muck I'd collected. It was impossible, though, to get vehicle manufacturers to adopt it because diesel fuel was significantly cheaper than petrol, and everyone was being told that diesel was the green way to go, despite it producing nitrous oxides, sulfur dioxides, and hydrocarbons. This, sadly, was a case of banging our heads against an unflinching concrete wall, although we only finally gave up in 1998. Although this was a disappointment, the diesel trap was proof that my cyclonic technology was transferable to other inventions and products. This technology is something that was becoming increasingly important at Dyson. While always on the lookout for revolutionary developments in technology, we could develop and refine what we've come up with to date for use in other devices, as we'll see in the next chapter.
Simon & Schuster Audio presents Invention, a Life. Written and read by James Dyson.
Postscript by Jake Dyson. Dad was different from other fathers. He was always very individual, going against the grain and standing out. There was something that made us think he was special. Whether this was the determination he showed in everything he did, or the mismatched socks and the slightly odd clothes he wore when he picked us up from school. As children, we were never embarrassed by him being different. We were brought up around creativity. We also thought that he was going to succeed in something. We felt his drive, his passion for what he was doing, and believed in it. Because Dad worked from home in the early days, we were always part of what was going on. We were a family business from the start. I remember days when I was off school, ill, with some bug, with the smell of soapy plastic wafting through the air and seeing bullberries coming off the production line. This was on a very small scale, but I was proud and excited by what Dad was doing. I remember vividly, too, the day he came back from being booted out of the Bullbarrow Company. That was a tough time for Mum and Dad. For a child, though, it was a great adventure. I remember having great fun zooming around on a wheelchair Dad developed with Jeremy Fry, with Lord Snowdon popping in and out to see how it was coming on. Or heading down to Poole Harbour to watch one of the prototype paddle boats being tested, or sitting in a sea truck going full speed across the open sea. Dad made and experimented with things, seemingly oblivious to the dangers involved. I very clearly remember him making a vacuum forming machine in the cellar of our house at Bath Ford. These are machines that shape plastic. They cost thousands of pounds to buy, so Dad decided to make one. They are highly dangerous with kilowatts of power going through big coils. I remember him down in the cellar for weeks. There was lots of clattering and swearing, but he did it, and without destroying the house. It worked. Then there was the vacuum cleaner. I remember him converting the coach house, which up to that point had been a wood store where I would hide my friends, into a workshop. I spent a whole summer holiday making 10 working vacuum cleaner prototypes with the model makers, while Dad was upstairs at the drawing board producing drawings to a level of accuracy that meant they could be handed over direct to a tool maker for production. It was hard work on everyone's part, but the atmosphere was a happy one. The young RCA graduates who came to work with Dad in the coach house were fun. We played tennis with them at lunchtime. I remember Dad making and doing everything himself at home as well as at work. I used to play a lot of cricket in the garden and broke many windows. He got really fed up with this, so he taught me to fix windows and cut glass myself. Over time I got fed up with this, so I started replacing the glass with polycarbonate. which he only noticed when the pain started to go milky. I was learning from him how to do things myself. Dad would not overly protect us or fight our corner, but he would debate things with our school, usually telling the teachers how old-fashioned they were. Particularly at dinner parties, he would be deliberately confrontational and come up with some alternative argument to make conversations more interesting. At one of our New Year parties, he abseiled down the wall. He was an attentive father and made things for us, like a very well-engineered zip wire. He plumbed and wired the entire house in the evenings and at the weekends, as well as playing with us and looking after us. He was full of energy. I do remember the champagne being popped when Dad said he had a license agreement with a company in America, but things quickly went sour. The battle with Amway was long and painful. He had worked so hard for so long on his invention. The stress and hurt he felt was clear to see. There was a lot of tension in the house about money. Mum hosted life classes to help make ends meet. As an 11-year-old, I could just about understand what was going on. During the battle with Amway, I remember him reading every single word of every single legal document. That was intense. Many people would have left that up to a lawyer, but Dad wanted to understand every word to give him the best chance of winning. Working with a lawyer, but understanding every word is probably why he won. Dad's attention to this smallest detail in anything he does is very much part of his character. I don't remember any celebrations at all, though, when he finally won the case. All the focus was on how he could make the vacuum cleaner and start selling it. He was away after this, travelling constantly, off to Japan for 6 weeks and then to other countries selling. As Dad mentioned earlier, when he was in Japan, a squirrel ate through a water tank pipe in the attic, the consequent flooding bringing down several ceilings. We all slept in the living room for 2 weeks. This gives a flavour of what Mum endured while Dad was on his mission. He came back from those 6 weeks quite numb, tired and overworked. But it was only another 6 weeks before we had a manufactured product, the shocking pink G-Force, in our house. The proudest moment for me was seeing what Dad had created on sale and reading about it in magazines. Things started to change dramatically after that. When I first started college at Central St Martin's in London, everyone was talking about big-name stylist designers and how they were leading the way. By my 3rd year, overhead projectors were showing pictures of Dad as an example of how you could combine manufacturing with design and business. It was overwhelming. I was incredibly proud and knew something interesting was happening. There was clearly no respite as far as Dad was concerned, but it was amazing to see how he experimented with everything, including his own marketing. He launched the DC03 at the Sanctuary, a fashionable spa in Covent Garden, with vacuum cleaners emerging from the spa pool. It was bonkers, but people took notice. Dyson was different, as Dad had always been. He had taught himself how to invent, engineer and make a radical product, while at the same time learning to be a lawyer, a marketeer, a salesman, and his own advertising and marketing man. He was obsessed with both micro-detail and the big picture. Success came, and it really hasn't changed him. He credits those who have brought and continue to bring success Dyson's way. He has constantly paid respect to Jeremy Fry, his mentor, for all that he taught him. As for what he taught me, my siblings and all those working for him, it can be summed up best as I can do that. It doesn't matter if the challenge is making something entirely new, replumbing a house, or taking on a powerful multinational. He just gets on and does it. He has no fear. This is the thing we need to uphold in the culture of Dyson, the no-fear culture, the need to be adventurous. The business is at a certain scale today, and as a family we choose to plough the profits back into the business so that we continue to take risks. I did the same in a small way in Dad's image with my lighting company before I joined Dyson in 2015, taking on big lighting manufacturers with entirely new products. Dad has a level of energy that he passes on to all the young Dyson engineers. He encourages them to turn things on their head and to avoid thinking in a conservative way. He wants them to understand that for new inventions and products to be successful, they have to be of an order of magnitude better than what went before. They must take risks. They must, in their own ways, be fearless. Learn as you go is the other principle Dad has applied through life. Start with ideas, understand things, learn and improve. This is the principle guiding the Dyson Institute. Having employed lots of graduates at Dyson, we had a pretty clear idea of how we can create a curriculum for these young people, allowing them to study academically while working on live research and manufacturing projects so that they learn as they work. They are given the freedom to experiment while working on really hard engineering principles. As a business, we understand that investing in technology with a long-term view is the vital ingredient. But we have also learnt in the process of manufacturing 25 million products a year that the rest of the business has to be set up to support that. There are no reference points for this, since nobody makes the products we do, and certainly not on the same scale and quality. We have to continually think of new ways of supporting our customers through controlling the quality of our products and maintaining a direct relationship with them. And this requires a technology of its own. The technology to run the business is increasingly a sphere in which we are going to have to innovate to take Dyson forward. We also want Dyson to remain a startup in spirit, with the freedom this implies in terms of experimentation, learning and adventure. What we certainly don't want is layers of management. They may seem to be a safe way of doing things, but we are a collaborative business that changes and evolves weekly. We're always trying to work out how to improve systems and collaboration between teams. We need as little management as possible, nor do we like being told what to do as management tends to do. We want to discover this for ourselves, although we are totally open to people, creative individuals, coming to talk to us directly. The business grows at pace, and you have to redesign everything in it to keep up with that pace. Dad is totally in tune with this. He is unafraid to rebuild entirely everything he has created in order to make a better version or to kill a successful product with an even better one. As a family-run business, we believe in a long-term vision and think it's so important to invest and reinvest in future bets, in talented young people, investing in hunches, so that we can set teams on these technologies now while being very patient. We are very open-minded in terms of going into new areas, and as a family business, we are completely free to go wherever we think we can and should, without shareholders pressuring us for a quick return. Our mentality is to make things we believe in, and not what the market might expect us to make. As a family, we were brought up to be creative, to experience and then to create new things, different things, things that go against the grain. And as Dad has always encouraged us, to just do it.
Invention, A Life, was written and read by James Dyson. Terry Hogan was the mix engineer. This has been a presentation of Simon & Schuster Audio. Invention, A Life, is available in print from Simon & Schuster.
Chapter 12. Making the Future. In many ways, I have come to live what might seem to be a contradictory life, part in the future and part in the past. Most of my waking time is spent in our labs, surrounded by Dyson's engineers and scientists, exploring ideas that we hope might shape the future in 5, 10, possibly many more years' time. Ours is a life of challenge and frustration, all of which is a fulfilling pastime. But I also have an interest, verging on obsession, with the past, with the stories, artifacts and spaces that have shaped our world. Repairing the old and adding the new has become as much an important part of my life as inventing has for the future. Renovation might sound an odd enthusiasm for a modern designer and engineer, yet there is much to learn from the past and from those who shaped the world before us. This is not about nostalgia, quite the opposite. It is about understanding and celebrating the progress that has been achieved, learning from it and building on it. Perhaps it is my circumstances, losing my father early in life, being given responsibility beyond my years early in my career by Jeremy Fry, and being fortunate to have a supporting wife and family that have given me the self-reliance and faith to pursue ideas. I really do enjoy making things, and whenever possible, doing things myself, constantly learning in the process. This is as true at work as it is at home, and is evident from the various projects we have bought as houses. At various points, I've had to be a plumber, a plasterer, an electrician, and best of all, a JCB excavator driver. I've designed new furniture and fittings. The extensive restoration Deirdre and I have undertaken at Doddington over the past 19 years is the grandest example. Designed by James Wyatt and built between 1798 and 1818, the house was in dire need of renovation when we took it on. But rather than outsource the work to one main contractor, we decided to do it ourselves in a stepwise manner, learning as we went, and building our own team of people skilled in trades and crafts and with real passion and expertise. This has been a long, rewarding, and as yet unfinished challenge, rather like the renovation of our 1930s yacht, Narlin, which we rescued as an even greater, indeed quite literal, wreck. Closer to work, the Whittle jet engine, which we have lovingly restored to its original specification, and which we fire up from time to time in the car park at Malmesbury, is another good example of restoration of the past. Though it needed love when we took it on, the Whittle engine is not some old-world object. It is the embodiment of Frank Whittle's revolutionary concept, a way of solving the problem of how aircraft could fly at much greater height, speed and smoothness than they could possibly do in 1930. The idea that he formulated at the age of 23 for a wholly new form of aero engine was as extraordinary as it was fragile. And who wanted to believe Whittle was right? Certainly not government experts. He had to pursue his project alone. Yet in doing so, he revolutionized flight for everyone and changed the course of the Second World War. While the Whittle engine is perhaps my biggest inspiration, there are a great many similar design and engineering icons scattered around our campuses, each with its own story. There is an English Electric Lightning jet hanging in one of our campus cafes, a Concorde engine in one of our office spaces, and a dissected Mini parked in another, and a Harrier jump jet in the car park. One of these, the Mini, is a good example of why you should not listen to market research. BMC, British Motor Corporation, cancelled one of the two proposed Mini production lines as a result of the feedback from market research. The corporation was told that people would refuse to buy a car with such small wheels. In the event, BMC was never able to catch up with the demand that followed the launch of the trend-setting Mini. There are many more examples I won't name here, yet each such artifact has its own story of against-the-odds progress and lessons on why faith in your ideas and believing in progress is so very important. What these pieces of our history demonstrate is that it is hard for other people to understand or get excited by an entirely new idea. This requires self-reliance and faith on the part of the inventor. I can also see that it's hard for an outsider to understand the challenge and thrill of inventing new technology, designing and manufacturing the product, and then selling it to the world. What is disgraceful is the portrayal in television programs like The Apprentice or Dragon's Den of entrepreneurship and business as a brutish endeavour, which only serves to reinforce everyone's worst view of business. Some good products have come through Dragon's Den, though not always the ones chosen. Being an entrepreneur is not the same as being the wide boy of the media's imagination. It is about creating new products and new opportunities, generating rewarding employment and opportunities in the process. At best, the entrepreneur is part of a cycle of renewal, driving progress. It is not easy, of course. The margin between profit and loss, between success and failure, is small. It may be necessary to change, to reinvent your business as circumstances change around you. Just as you think you have understood a situation and how things work, it changes without warning. There are traps round every corner. I have got to the point where I truly worry if everything is going smoothly. It's rather like being the US cavalry officer in an old western when he says, "I don't like it, Sergeant, seems too quiet," and immediately gets an arrow in the chest. Every day is an adventure and a response to the unexpected. Even if things appear to be in some kind of stasis, a company must move on. It has to get better, evolve, and improve in order to survive. There is no greater danger than satisfaction. As soon as Dyson became successful, people in Britain asked me when I was going to sell the company, as if I was only lowering myself temporarily into the dim and grubby world of uncreative manufacturing. Once I'd made my first million, it was surely time for me to get away from the sweat, grime and grim routine of factory life, and to become a reclusive landowner, building duck houses perhaps, and cleaning the moat around my house. In any case, why would a supposedly educated person be rootling about in factories when he could be doing something creative, and preferably from an office or studio? Britain is about the only nation I know whose entrepreneurs, at the earliest opportunity, sell out or take the company public, often the first step towards that sellout. This has always puzzled and saddened me, partly because I believe that business loses something when it goes public, but also because so many of these businesses end up in foreign hands, losing their way and ending up as vassal companies. Entrepreneurial family businesses, on the other hand, may be handed down through generations. Britain has remarkably few compared with other countries. In Germany, for example, there are the famous Mittelstand, medium-sized private businesses, as well as giants like BMW and our competitor Bosch. France has big family-owned fashion houses. Italy and Spain the same. The US has the largest number of family businesses in the world, including Mars and Cargill, the agri-chemicals business. Yet in Britain, it is hard to name a significant private business founded by an entrepreneur other than JCB. I believe Britain is weaker through not having a large number of successful family businesses. The advantages of family businesses are that they can think in the very long term and invest in the long term in ways public companies are unable to do. I also believe that family-owned enterprises have a spirit, conscience and philosophy often lacking in public companies. It is as though British entrepreneurs want to cash out as fast as possible, either because they only ever did it for the money, or because they're frightened of losing it all if they carry on. If it was for the money, this implies that they lacked a passion for what they were doing, for their businesses, their colleagues, and even their customers. Theirs was a short-term way of becoming rich, underpinned by a fear of losing the business before they have had time to cash in. This lack of conviction, lack of belief in what they're doing, is worrying. Why do the British feel like this, while other nations' entrepreneurs do not? Is it because, although we instigated the Industrial Revolution, we failed to continue it as well as other nations. Historically, British companies could supply their goods to the empire, providing easy sales, whereas other nations had to use their industrial might to compete at world trade and so made a greater long-term success. Is it because the British aristocracy never worked, but rather inherited wealth? So the built-in psyche is to make enough money so that you never have to work again? Is it that the British do not see a company as an enterprise that makes wonderful products, employs and supports many others? Do they not see that as the owners they have a duty to nurture and sustain the enterprise for the benefit of all those employed? Finally, is it because we admire brilliance and easy success over the longer stamina and grind of running a business for generations? Many wise friends advised me to sell up in the early days when a few attractive offers came in. I suspect they feared that I might lose it all, or they felt that I'd achieved all that I needed to achieve. It is true that a family business has most of its wealth tied up in the business. Continuing to keep it as a family business is both a risk and a responsibility. But I like living on a knife edge, competing and building the business. I am passionate about developing new technology and working with a wonderful and creative team around me. If we fail, better drowned than duffers. These kind people totally miss the point. I didn't work on those 5,127 vacuum cleaner prototypes, or even set up Dyson to make money. I did it because I had a burning desire to do so. And, as do my thousands of colleagues, I find inventing, researching, testing, designing and manufacturing both highly creative and deeply satisfying. I also happen to think that future generations of children will be excited about careers and lives in invention, engineering and manufacturing, if only they can be encouraged to do so through education. Early on in our story, the clear bin on our vacuum cleaners was another clear example of going our own way regardless. Trusting our own instincts, we decided to ignore the research and the retailers. Pete and I had been developing the vacuum cleaner, and we loved seeing the dust and dirt. We didn't want to hide away all the hard work the machine had done. Going against established expert thinking was a huge risk. No one could confirm that what we were doing was a good idea. Everyone, in fact, confirmed the reverse. The data were all against it. If, however, we had believed the science and not trusted our instincts, we would have ended up following the path of dull conformity. The clear bin proved successful, and ever since, all the Johnny-come-latelys in the world of vacuum cleaner production have clear bins too. They copied it because the clear bin was a symbol of successful new technology. Of course, they also clambered onto the clear bin bandwagon because it sold, and continues to do so in ever-increasing numbers. In following a different path, obstacles will be put in the way of pioneering manufacturers. Yet the process of creativity and of solving seemingly insoluble problems is rather wonderful. It is, though, hard to be pioneering because you don't know whether or not you're going to succeed. You will stumble and have to pick yourself back up, believing that you will succeed. It is scary, and I'm scared all the time. Fear, though, can be a good thing, as it pumps the adrenaline and motivates, as sportsmen will confirm. A life of perpetual learning, pursuing science, engineering and technology, has certainly been a truly magical and fulfilling adventure. The quiet thrill of improving products through the application of technology and making them enjoyable and surprising to use. For an engineer, the creative impulse, the desire to prove things, and the need to solve problems are a state of mind that cannot be switched off. It's there all the time, whether you're at work or at home. It is the intellectual challenge of seeing frustrations and problems and developing a product or system that solves them. Scientists and engineers combined recognise today's problems and are capable of providing new solutions. History has proved this time and time again. The challenges of the future will be met and resolved by people who are young now, who can see the problems we face and have the urge, the impulse to solve them. It is their world now, and they don't need people ranting about the end of the world, nor Jeremiah-like politicians proclaiming, nor even old people like me telling them what to do. The most important thing is that we encourage them to do it and to make their own mistakes along the way, while providing a supportive framework within which they can operate successfully. I have great faith that science and technology can solve problems, from more sustainable and efficient products to the production of more and better food and a more sustainable world. It is technological and scientific breakthroughs, far more than messages of doom, that will lead to this world. We need to go forward optimistically into the future, as if into the light, and with bright new ideas, rather than the darkness and an end to human ingenuity portrayed by doomsayers. After the event, a revolutionary new idea can look so obvious. Surely no one could possibly have doubted it. At their conception, though, new ideas are not blindingly obvious. They are fragile things, in need of encouragement and nurturing against doubting Thomases, know-it-alls, and so-called experts. Just as Frank Whittle discovered, it is easy for people to say no, to dismiss new ideas, and to be stick-in-the-muds, pessimists, or even cynics. It's much harder to see how something unexpected might be a success. The depressing thing is that harbingers of doom and gloom get far more attention than optimists and problem solvers. I feel very strongly that progress should be embraced and encouraged, and it is a duty of governments and companies to catalyse the ideas of the progressives and harness them to achieve good ends. There is no denying that the world faces some rather big problems, but there is no sense in trying to force people to go backwards as a result, or to rewind progress. I am certain that we will overcome our greatest challenges by moving forwards confidently and having faith in humanity's ingenuity. Problems are there to be solved, and this in itself is exciting and motivating. For our part, Dyson has been lucky to recruit some wonderful young people who come bubbling with ideas and a desire to change things for the better. Many of these individuals have been fresh graduates, but now increasingly they're undergraduates too, school leavers who are forging their education at the Dyson Institute, while at the same time contributing to the future. Meanwhile, the rest of us need to stay young at heart and never less than inquisitive. A case in point is one of our most inventive Dyson engineers, who is in his 80s. He has the curiosity of a young boy. He is an indefatigable optimist, challenging everything that needs to be challenged. He is enthusiastic and always willing to try new things. His is a truly creative mindset. There is hope, then, for us all as we look with clear and creative eyes and minds into a future where things can be so much better than they are today. We are at a truly fascinating juncture in human history, and we must press on. Dyson has certainly never stood still as it has grown up. At times, this has been uncomfortable, and not everyone has understood why we have had to change. From those first trips to Tokyo to negotiate a license agreement for the G-Force, I have been excited about embracing the world. At its best, globalization has the potential to raise everyone up. Success around the world provides the means to invest in research and better technology, driving our world forward. Today, we have people from 54 nations working at the Mantry campus, and people working for us in 83 countries around the world. We're stronger for it. They have a shared purpose and a global perspective, but also a diversity of thought and culture. While age is no barrier at Dyson, most of our staff are young. They are open-minded and have the naive intelligence to think differently. These brilliant young people understand the problems facing the world on both a macro and a micro scale. They are busy at work on a remarkable range of ideas and inventions that can and will make a difference to our lives. They are not academics publishing dry papers that set out simply to dismiss equally dry papers by rival academics. They are not would-be government scientists with all their smug expert advice, which is often wrong. They are not driven by people shouting in streets and squares. They are working, hands-on, with fragile ideas fired by a creative impulse, and they need all the support I, or any of us, running alongside to keep up, can give them. They are our future. Imagine if their spirit of optimism and invention was harnessed for the world. These young people show the power that comes from being unafraid to pursue new ideas, to challenge orthodoxy and their own beliefs. While I am loath to give anyone advice, I do encourage others and remind myself too to be adventurous. We must follow our own stars. Deirdre and I are very pleased that our 3 children have done just this. As it happens, we're all designers of one kind or another, with a shared outlook. Jake studied design, but veered towards technology as an engineering designer. His final year project was a water turbine housed in a large waste pipe generating electricity from household wastewater and rainwater. We installed it at Dyson, and it was much admired by a visiting Prince Charles. Jake taught himself to use a lathe, and today has metalworking machinery at his home, often machining things he's dreamed up. Sam is a natural engineer, designing an ironing board supported by gas struts at school, and was later an engineer at Dyson. He left to follow his real passion, music. He is a fearless performer, quite shocking us, when he once played the lead role in Peter Schaffer's Equus. He started playing the flute aged 7, then taught himself the drums, the piano, and finally his main instrument, the guitar. He is using his engineering to great effect, creating music and devising ways to do so online. He has his own band, Ramona Flowers, as well as Distillers, his record label. We love his music, and he is successfully navigating a path through the wreckage of the music business. Emily is a talented fashion designer who started her career at Paul Smith, where she met Ian, a gifted fellow designer and now her husband. Emily set up Couverture in 1999, originally in the King's Road, with her bedwear and bed linen designs. Her designs are very original. One had the duvet cover as an envelope, complete with a postage stamp, of the Queen's head in profile, with eyes closed, asleep. This incurred the wrath of the post office lawyers, as they have a monopoly of the Queen on postage stamps. Now in London's Notting Hill, in the 3-storey shop, Emily and Ian have together created the successful Couverture and the Garb Store. Couverture has women's wear and home accessories, while the Garb Store has menswear. Ian's unusual designs are the main source for Jake's and my wardrobe. Deirdre and I are thrilled that Emily and Ian have pioneered their own field of design in such a competitive business, where they are recognised as ones to follow. I have never pushed or even asked any of them to join Dyson, yet they have all said that they would like the business to remain in the family. Having done his own thing for 20 years, including establishing his own innovative and successful lighting company, Jake made his own decision to join the company in 2015, bringing his technology with him. We're lucky to have him, his inventiveness, and his ideas for the future. I love working with Jake, and am very proud of what he is doing. Indeed, it is hard for Deirdre and I to imagine how we could be more thrilled that all 3 of our children have chosen to be creative pioneers. They have also been loving and devoted parents to their delightful children, our grandchildren. They all join us on holidays, where we can see how they develop, their lust for life, their bravery, and love for each other. While there have been family tragedies and difficult times, they have all maintained a spirit of optimism, with a desire to create something new. I was overwhelmed to have all of them around us at my 70th birthday party. It is hard to know where the Dyson family stops and the Dyson family business begins. Having grown up with and in Dyson, Deirdre, Emily, Jake and Sam are passionate about the company and keen for it to retain the philosophy of adventure that's underpinned and spurred it along from the beginning. Of course, this will mutate and evolve. The future will be different, and it may even take the company off in a different direction. But the really important thing is that we maintain the spirit of adventure and don't become afraid of being original, pioneering, and exciting. What we do know is that companies always have to change to get better at what they do, plan to do, and even dream of doing in the future. The adage that the only certainty is change is true, and this means not being afraid of change, even if for a company it means dismantling what you have built in order to rebuild it stronger, or killing your own successful product with a better one, as we did with our new format battery vacuum cleaners. People might not understand radically new concepts and products to begin with. Yet if we persist and show their benefits, as we did with the Cyclone and the new format stick vac, they will understand and come on the journey with us along the path less travelled. One of the advantages of being a private family company is that we can do this. We can take the risk. This is because we are not subject to the vagaries of the stock market. Yes, a private company must have the same disciplines as a public company, yet in many ways we can take much bigger risks than a public company. We certainly have taken big risks with the digital motor, the washing machine, the electric car, and our research into solid-state batteries. Not all have been commercially successful. That is the point. By its very nature, pioneering will not always be successful. Otherwise, it would be all too easy. We don't start these ventures with the inevitability of success. We're all too aware that we may well fail. Of course, I don't know the ultimate destination for Dyson. That is for someone else to determine. But the only thing I ask is that it is an exciting one. Above all, how can we avoid being duffers? It comes from working away single-mindedly at solving a problem, however many setbacks befall us, even if that means 5,127 prototypes, and retaining an open mind. Remember that there is nothing wrong with being persistently dissatisfied, or even afraid. We should follow our interests and instincts, mistrusting experts, knowing that life is one long journey of learning, often from mistakes. We must keep on running, and we really can do better. Introduction. In 1983, after 4 years of building and testing 5,127 handmade prototypes of my cyclonic vacuum cleaner, I finally cracked it. Perhaps I should have punched the air, whooped loudly, and run down the road from my workshop, shrieking Eureka at the top of my voice. Instead, far from feeling elated, which surely after 5,126 failures I should have been, I felt strangely deflated. How could this have been? The answer lies in failure. Day after day, with the wolf at the door, I had been pursuing the development of an ever more efficient cyclone for collecting and separating dust from a flow of air. I had built several cyclones each day, conducting tests on each one to evaluate its effectiveness in collecting dust as fine as half a micron. The width of a human hair is between 50 and 100 microns, while using as little energy as possible. This might sound boring and tedious to the outsider. I get that. But when you've set yourself an objective that, if reached, might pioneer a better solution to existing technologies and products, you become engaged, hooked, and even one-track-minded. Folklore depicts invention as a flash of brilliance, that eureka moment. but it really is, I'm afraid. It is more about failure than ultimate success. I even thought of calling this book James Dyson Failure, but was talked out of it because it might give the wrong impression. People want to read about success. Funnily enough, engineers who are good at inventing things are never satisfied with their latest creation. They tend to look at it quizzically and say, "I know how to make it better," which is a wonderful opportunity. This is the start of reinvention, making another leap in performance. And yet, if would-be young inventors could see that pioneering a cure for Alzheimer's, for example, is not about eureka flashes of Archimedean brilliance, but more about an intelligent pursuit of diligent research, they might be less discouraged by the notion that brilliance is a prerequisite for their research. Research is about conducting experiments, accepting and even enjoying failures, but going on, following a theory garnered from observing the science. Invention is often more about endurance and patient observation than brainwaves. I wanted to write my story now, just as the first cohort of Dyson students graduated their convocation from the Dyson University. It caused me to reflect on what I felt at the same occasion 52 years ago when I graduated from the Royal College of Art, as well as what happened to me since. It is a story told through a life of creating and developing things, as well as expressing a call to arms for young people to become engineers, creating solutions to our current and future problems. My tale is one of not being brilliant. I wasn't even trained as an engineer or scientist. I did, however, have the bloody-mindedness not to follow convention, to challenge experts, and to ignore doubting Thomases. I'm also someone who's prepared to slog through prototype after prototype, searching for the breakthrough. If a slow starter like me could succeed, surely this might encourage others. I remember setting out with my degree, excited that I would be making a product that I'd helped design, but not having a clue about volume manufacturing or marketing. I was naive and eager to learn all that as I progressed. It was a steep learning curve, though, and still is. Everything changes all the time, so experience is of little use. I didn't know that at the time and assumed it would become easier with experience. It must be encouraging for those just graduating to know that this is not the case. 52 years later, I can assure my graduates that I am no better for my experience. The big change for me is that I now have around me an extraordinarily talented team, hell-bent on creating new technology and delivering it to our millions of customers throughout the world. We share the same belief in pioneering our own way, with the same determination to overcome the difficulties. More than anything, their loyalty and dedication is what has built Dyson into a global technology company. Working with them is as inspirational as it gets. The vacuum story began 42 years ago. Day after day, I crossed my yard at home to a small coach house to continue my quest to develop a cyclonic system for separating dust without a clogging bag. The early days were spent, as with most research and development, testing prototypes with different parameters in order to discover certain truths about dimensions and shapes. This is the essential groundwork of learning the art, before starting the experimental work to make the quantum leap. I look forward to going to work, hoping that maybe today I would discover something new and inch my way forwards. The failures began to excite me. Wait a minute, that should have worked. Now why didn't it? I was scratching my head, mystified, but then had another idea for an experiment that might lead to solving the problem. I was usually covered in dust, getting deeper and deeper into debt, yet happy and absorbed. Fortunately, my wife Deirdre allowed me to put our house and home life at risk, while the bank was kind enough to lend us the money. She and our children never expressed doubt about what I was doing every day. They offered encouragement, love, and understanding. Without that, I'd have given up. The same is true of every one of our friends. They must have thought I was mad and wasting my time leading my family into penury. They never said so. Instead, they supported us and gave us the unstinting encouragement, without which I also doubt I could have lasted the course. They are true and close friends. The reason I think invention is so very important today is that young people are passionate about saving the planet, improving the environment, and finding cures for life-threatening diseases. I happen to believe that all these problems can be solved by the diligent application of research and development. And I would love to see more school children and university students motivated to becoming engineers and scientists to make the breakthroughs that they so want to happen. We should be encouraging the young to become doers rather than virtue signallers, to help them strive to solve the problems of their age while looking forward to a better future. During my career, I've tried to seek out those young people who can make the world a better place. I've seen what miracles they can achieve. This book is aimed at encouraging them. Some may well become heirs to my heroes, inventors, engineers and designers who make their appearance in these pages. Like them, they will not find it easy, and they will need oodles of determination and stamina along the way. They will have to run and run hard, which is how my life story began. This book is dedicated to Deirdre, without whose love, encouragement, advice, tolerance, and forbearance none of this would have ever happened. Also to Emily, Jake and Sam, and our wonderful grandchildren, who make the closest of families, and whose enthusiasm for creating things flourishes so strongly.